Good evening, everyone who's in the land of Oz. Anyone out beyond the land of Oz to the west of the world, well, you know who you are. Anyway, you're in the early hours of the daytime. So welcome to a Saturday Night Live. So I've cancelled the Eurasia, which is usually on the Sunday evening. So the Saturday night special is I do this program for those who are new to my channel or have never seen a Saturday Night Live. It's when Harry has something to do, socializing when he's being, a social butterfly. In the afternoon on Sundays, Australian Eastern Standard Time, he usually has his Saturday Night Live special. That's the reason for it. So now you know exactly. Those who have not been early subscribers to this channel and not aware of it, that are more recent comers, now you know. So let's get going. I've got Jonathan here as well, so I'll just bring him on. Welcome, Jonathan.
You had to do that, sorry. How's it going? It's not that epic, guys.
For fuck's sake, it'd only be a fucking POM would introduce themselves in this way.
Yeah, how's it going?
Oh, pretty good, mate. Pretty good. It's good to have you on, Jonathan.
Yeah, my pleasure.
How's the family and Sophie?
Generally quite good. Yeah, my mum's not very well at all at the moment, but everyone else is pretty good, pretty happy, so that's the main thing. How about you? How's Dad and everyone?
Yeah, Dad's doing pretty good. He's recovered quite well. Which was primarily the ligament type, being stretched, being knocked about and all that. All the actual bruising and all that, that's gone. He's sleeping fine now, not an issue there. And his mobility now, he's not getting any lockups. So it seems like the BPC 157, the body protection compound, has done the job in sort of sorting that down. I've had him on slightly higher dose of taurine as well to lower the inflammation and also help in actually reducing oxidative stress in all the different tissues, especially the collagen structures throughout the body. And that seemed to have done the job as well, because that's what it's supposed to do. I've talked about it before, you know about it. I mean, exercise, people doing exercise use it as a pre-workout, so to be able to do more, but at the same time to reduce the oxidative stress that happens. It pretty much means that you're actually improving the ability to reduce lactate and push that through to complex 1 in the mitochondria to basically get it out of the system to lower blood sugar and lower oxidative stress. So that's those key mechanisms of taurine. And so he's been doing that to reduce all the different areas of his own tissue, and it seems to have done the trick. So he's bounced back a hell of a lot better. He's back to his cheeky old self, because he's a very cheeky character. You think I'm cheeky? You haven't met my father. Very cheeky old man. And he's a unique character. No wonder he's got more friends than I've got, or more acquaintances and people that he knows than I have. So, and it doesn't surprise me. You think, I'm not compared to him. Forget about. I'm not even a social butterfly. And compared, he is a true, genuine, old-fashioned social butterfly.
Yeah. My late granddad was like that. He lived in Cyprus, and it's like everyone in the village knew him, with their Cypriot or Greek or Turkish or British. Like, everyone knew him. I'm like, how do you know so many people? It's weird.
That's good, It's
part of the hacks, isn't it?
It is really. Anyway, Darkfield Carnivore, how are you, mate? One that loves partying, I suspect. G'day, Paul. So Vivid Mouse isn't here today. Okay, fair enough. So Paul's a local from the southern part of Tasmania. So those who do venture onto Zoom would have probably met Paul on the occasion. G'day, Susie. Yes, I did pass on your regards, and he's doing fine as well, so thank you as well. Yes, he'll be back shortly. I'll be back.
And here he is.
I don't have the same Terminator, the same Terminator effect. I'll be back. I just don't have the accent for it.
You have to grow like 20-inch arms and about an extra foot in height, I think.
That's
Maybe
it.
it'll work.
Pretty much. Pretty much. I'll have a deeper voice then. Apparently there's... I actually saw this medical... He's a naturopathic doctor. I forget his name now. I saw a video ages ago, and he was actually talking about how the taller you are, you seem to... It's not only that the level of testosterone, but also there is like the vocal cords are slightly longer. And also if you've got a slightly... and so that seems to make the difference in the pitch as well. I just don't have it, guys. Sorry. I'm not that tall.
Yeah. It's funny that you always imagine...
Jonathan is acting.
Yeah, I have processing on my microphone to make my voice actually a bit clearer and a bit high pitch, funny enough. But yeah, I notice with tall people, like when you think of like a leader, you always think like a 6 foot plus guy, a really deep voice. Yep. You know, it's funny that.
That's it. Yeah. I mean, I've actually been like a leader in different organisations in the past, and even in student politics, I did well as a youngster. But I think that was less to do with my deep voice, and more to do that I was prepared to get on the stage and talk to people and front them up, and actually have a bit of flair in the way I would talk, and a bit of theatrics, and it seemed to sort of energize the crowd, get them going.
Yeah, my
fuel
brother and I have a friend like that.
So that sort of.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Some people just have that knack. I think they develop it over time. And like my mum loves watching your stuff, for example. I think she finds your stuff really entertaining.
Yep. Oh, that's nice. Thank her for that. Look, I got as a youngster, when I was a really young child, I was very much by nature is introvert. I'm actually an introvert by nature. So most people that know me from a very young age know that I'm an introvert person. I'm not an extrovert. So I've developed the extrovert nature of my character, and by getting into politics as a youngster in student politics, and also not wanting to lose an argument. So that's why I usually used to read profusely amount of stuff. I would just suck information up like there's no tomorrow. So I had that character, like I'd read 7 books in a week. So I would basically, by the next week, if I lost an argument, by the next week, I'd be able to nail those people. So probably youthful ego, stuff like that. I was an atheist at the time, so I thought differently than what I think now as being an Orthodox Christian. I try to suppress that side of me to be a bit more different the way I behave. My compassionate side is much more developed than what it was as a youngster. So other things drove me. Maybe God saved me to be able to help save others. I don't know what his mission is and what the cross that I have to bear. But having a second lease of life, a second chance, so this has really, you could say, removed a lot of my arrogance, because I did have it. I have to be honest. I was an arrogant young child. That's why I can understand some of these leftist kids. I know where they're coming from, because I was even worse than them. I mean, my first article at the age of 15 my first article in a magazine, it was actually a newspaper. was basically an anti-Christian one. So it was an anti-religious one. So I've still got it somewhere. It's in Greek, but so I wrote that years ago. And so I had this, both a polemic against God, the arrogance, a lot of pride. There was no basically humility in me at the time. And I was a very different character. So for me, it was, I pushed myself to learn the art because I taught myself how to public speak. Sometimes I'd sit in front of a mirror and actually talk to the mirror as if I was talking to myself, just to see how I respond and all that, and then I would try it out in public and stuff like that. So that's how I actually, when I go and actually make public speak, even to this day, I still, not on YouTube, but public speak in front of real humans, not humans out in the ether that I can't see, but actually real humans, I still feel a bit of anxiety. And it's only about just before I actually, not for the whole period, it's just probably about 2 or 3 minutes before I start speaking. And then once I get going, it all vanishes. It's just that small little period of time, and it's still there. So it's that funny thing, even to this day. It's sort of like muscle memory. It's still there in the background, It's like the Pavlov's dog. I mean, conditioned in a certain way to have that, and it's still there. And it doesn't make sense to me even now, because I have no difficulty speaking in front of people, or interacting with the opposite sex, or interacting with younger people, older people on a one-to-one basis. Not an issue. But a whole crowd, for some reason, for 2 or 3 minutes, I get that little and then I calm down. Once I start speaking, that eliminates that immediately, because then I feel in control of the situation. I'm running, you could say, the whole event at that stage, and my mind just switches to that, and the focus is on the delivery. So it's a strange feeling, but it's still there. It's just it's interesting how we humans are made and how we operate.
Yeah, I'm the same in a way, Harry. So I've been a model as like a side hustle since I was 2016, I believe. And I still get that same feeling that you described before every session. It lasts like 1 or 2, maybe 3 minutes, and after that I'm fine. Like once you've taken control of the room, you kind of know what's going on. I'm completely fine. So, and it's weird. And my dad's the same. He's an accountant, stereotypical kind of introvert. But once he's talking to a crowd, he's brilliant. He makes like the best presentations and stuff like that. So,
yeah. It's really funny. I could do that as well. It's just that just before that slight momentary thing before. So it must be an introvert thing. Oh, hope you're having a good time in Hungary. Aggravator, morning. Just cooking steak and eggs. Sounds pretty good. And Stefan, how are you, mate? Oops. Hello, Harry. Found this by coincidence. I don't have many questions through this time, relatively speaking. Oh, usually Stefan puts a lot of questions.
That's what we're here for. It's a Q&A.
Yes. Exactly. Precisely. G'day, Johnny. And Tom. Harry. Did you? Yes, we do. Yes. Now you know, because I didn't know the intro. I've covered that point. Oops. God. Now that's a difficult. It looks Polish. So
It's Polish. Yeah,
thank you for saying
client.
that. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
So do you know how it's pronounced?
It's Zbigniew Warzenek. Yeah.
Okay, Zbigniew Warzenek. Welcome to the channel, mate.
Good day.
And g'day, Norman. And Necro Kitty's here as well. Scampers in. She's a character. Anika, how are you? And a question from Serpanos. Dr. Sheen Omar talked about adiponectin against inflammation, and it's produced in this visceral fat on the belly, and that's why a super visible six-pack isn't so good. Thoughts? What are your thoughts, since you're usually into this sort of six-pack world?
The six-pack.
Gives me a chance to drink my coffee.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. Like, we know there's different profiles of different fats in different areas of your body, and how they interact in terms of your hormonal status is quite interesting. And whenever we're talking about like specific anti-inflammatory pathways, like Harry was mentioned, there's other stuff that goes on. So I think the idea in this case isn't to be like ripped out of your mind, like have a really visible six-pack or veins and stuff. But I think, you know, what it is for you as an individual is quite specific. I mean, I know people that are, by blood markers, by fitness, by overall feeling, subjective feeling of health, they feel great, and they're like 20% body fat as an adult male. Now I know people that are feeling the same way at 10% body fat, where they might have a visible six-pack. I don't think there's a rule of thumb of what is good or bad in a sense. I think as much as we have all these different markers and things going on in the body, I think it's more important to go by how you feel than anything extra in terms of like your visual, so your sex appeal, if it were, is kind of a benefit.
Yep. Look. Yes, it does help in that regard. Look, when it comes to the release of hormones, you will get a different sort of hormonal response depending on the level of body fat, you know, including in things like some of the stress hormones as well. It's just a normal sort of thing. And depending on what your intake of energy is and your body fat percentage, it will have different effects on your endocrine system. For competition purposes, I can understand why people get down to very low body fat numbers in that regard. But I can tell you, once they finish competition, they unleash their ravenousness. You know, yeah. Jonathan's seen them. You know, they will hit the food like there's no tomorrow. Yeah, it's because you cannot sustain very low body fat for too long. We need some. If you even look at the tribal people, they have some level of body fat on them. They're not, you know, completely ripped. You know, and when they are ripped, it's usually in the dry season when the animals tend to be also less nourished. And they also tend to be thinner, which means that they've got less body fat, which also means that they get less energy from the animal that they actually get. So what do they do to compensate in this interglacial period? Because in a glacial period, animals all have a lot of body fat because they use it to keep themselves warmer. They build up more body fat, you know, under cold conditions. So the only thing that a tribal person can do is engage the Randall cycle seasonally. When the animals are quite fat at the end of the actual summer in the fall, they will actually consume the fattier animals, plus they will actually consume the fruit and some of the tubers. Now, some of the tubers are the wild tubers are very fibrous. But what they'll do is, like the Hadza do, they will suck out some of the glucose out of they won't eat, they will just cook them and then suck out because by cooking the tubers, the carbohydrates become softer, and then they can suck out and then they just spit out any of the fibrous part. They don't eat the fiber part. They're not stupid to damage their gut, their colon in particular. So That's what tribal people do, that they engage the Randall cycle. By engaging the Randall cycle, they can build up fat stores. All animals use fructose in nature to build up fat stores. There are fish in the Amazon 2 periods of the year that will come up when the Amazon actually floods, and they will eat the fruit off the trees, and they will fatten up, and they'll go from something like this small to something that big. And then they'll go deep, they'll dive deep down, and they will survive on that body fat that they've built up from the fructose. We know that fatty liver is produced, you can only produce a lot of fat in the liver through pretty much the fructose metabolism. There's no other way, you know. I mean, Lustig's done some research on that, you know, showing kids just being given pure glucose, yet to overfeed them to try and maintain their body weight. Because again, because they're eating primarily, they weren't engaging the Randall cycle, but they were sort of eating like a high carbohydrate, low fat sort of diet. They were disengaging the Randall cycle under those conditions, and they were basically losing weight. So they had to be overfed to try and maintain them, a bit like what our character Walter Kempner did back in the 30s with his experiments. But pretty much what we see with fructose in the entire animal kingdom. Now, there are some species, like there are certain birds that will actually consume fructose, and they operate slightly different. They can take the fructose in, and they will convert it into fats. They'll export it. They're really very efficient at exporting. They don't get fatty liver. These that eat nectar, pretty much consume nectar. These they're very little birds, and they just flap their wings. They sort of stay like stationary in front and just suck the nectar out. And you know, they have slightly different physiology. They can manage and process very differently fructose all year round. Where if the rest of us were doing that, we'd be engaging the Randall cycle all year round, and we'd be very sick. So they've actually have a mechanism to prevent Randall cycle activation by the way they process and then ship it out to basically protect their systems in the way they operate. So, you know, species adapt. That's what it is. We don't have that adaptation. Most other animals in nature don't. The majority of animals, the overwhelming 99.99% of animals, pretty much, and let's not forget, these are not mammals. Birds are the descendants of dinosaurs, or one type of dinosaur anyway that survived. So they have a very different physiology from mammals and many other species on the planet. So I sort of see that it's not a good idea to be low body fat. Extremely low. It's not a healthy thing. It's not something that humans have ever practiced. The reason why we have far more fat capacity and storage than other animals is primarily to be able to give us the energy to survive in an environment where there is scarcity primarily. So that's why we had to have that capacity to store. When we got fat, we consumed it. We forced it down our throats because we didn't know when the next meal would come. And in the interglacial periods, we've had to move towards utilizing, you know, because a lean animal, you're actually getting slightly less intake of, and this is the problem with the carnivore diet, especially when you're eating lean animal foods. You will lose a lot of weight, but once you've actually lost that body weight that you may have, then you're into low numbers. And that's when people start feeling, I don't really feel good on a carnivore diet. Well, you need to add more fat because you've depleted a lot of your storage of fat. And people don't realize that, and they do a steak only, they lose a lot of body fat, and then they're actually into these very low numbers, and they are feeling starved and hungry, and they have this, you know, like the rabbit starvation sort of effect. It's because they're not getting enough fat. And so options, if you can tolerate dairy, you can put in ghee or butter or stuff like that. If you can't, there are other options. You can get from a butcher, you can get extra trimmings, fat trimmings. Pork is really great, like pork rashers or pork rinds and stuff like that. They can actually add additional fat to your diet. So there are options out there that people can utilize. I know that like Jonathan, I sort of consume quite a bit of dairy, and that's where I get my sources. And I also, because I require more calcium because of my genetics, but some other people can utilize other methods. I think we've pretty much covered that.
Yeah.
Unless you've got something else that I haven't covered, or
No,
from
nothing
your own
really.
experience?
No, nothing to add really. No. We've got a question actually from. I'll just read it out quickly. It might be easier. If we can find it. So it's from Martin Sheshi. So he's asked me a question, but I'm only here for about another 25 minutes or so. He asked me about my body fat percentage, where I feel my best, and what is the minimum body fat before I think you're too low. I'll just quickly answer for me.
Yep.
I'm currently about
go
15%
right ahead.
body fat. Yeah, about 15% body fat right now. That's a realistic body fat percentage. I'd say for most people, anywhere between 10 and 20 is quite fair, quite safe. I've seen people at both ends of the spectrum that have had, healthy testosterone levels, good feeling, good blood markers. I think when you go beyond that, or you're on either end of the extreme, you can start to have issues. So that's pretty much it, really. There's nothing really going to add to that,
Yep. How low do you go? For people out there that may want to know, when you're in competition, how low do you go, or what's your level, and what's the lowest you've heard some people go to?
Yeah, so my lowest level that I've got to about 3 times is, I believe it's 3.5% body fat. That's measured using body fat calipers. So I've got 2 here. So I've got these, which are like you just pinch parts of your body.
Yep.
So I use 11 site method. So I have 11 places on my body where I pinch, basically. For more accuracy, I use these ones. So these are digital, so they do the same thing. They're just a bit easier to hold and stuff. But so 3.5%. So I've got most of my body, like if you pinch every part of my skin, down to about 2 millimeters. The skin on your body is about 2 millimeters thick, so basically absent of fat. With the exception that there's a few body parts where you just don't get much leaner than that. So there might be 3 millimeters, but yeah, for the most part, 2 or 3 millimeters all over my body of fat. The lowest I've actually heard is about 3% legitimately.
Have you ever calculated your to see what your rate of fatty acid breakdown is by measuring adiponectin or stuff like that, or those sort of hormones? Or
No, I've not bothered to do it. But I have noticed that the fastest I can lose body fat, based on like all the measurements I could put together, all the data I could get, is about 0.75 pounds per day. And that's with extreme energy expenditure, extreme dieting, all that sort of thing.
And exercising, yeah.
Loads, yeah. A lot. So most people are not going to be close to that,
So how many if you're not that I'm suggesting that people should go to those sort of extreme levels, that's very unhealthy. This is competition we're talking about. How many reps would you do continuous per day, and how many days to get to that level?
Yeah, so most of my sessions would be about an hour to an hour and a half long. What I end up doing as I get close to the competition is spreading out my workouts a bit. So I might do the same, but over more days. There's a few reasons for that. So the first reason is it gives you more time to focus on specific body parts as you get more tired. And when your body fat is very low, you're not going to be training for 90 minutes straight with a good intensity. Yep. The other thing is it takes your mind off things. So if you've got an extra day in the week to do some training, It's a day that you're not thinking for an hour or so about eating more food. So
Of food.
getting to that body fat is a hack. It is a scientific experiment. It is hard. So you find little ways to maneuver around it all as you get close to that sort of leanness. But like you said, Harry, it's not ideal, not optimal to be that body fat percentage. It's just strictly speaking in a pre-contest preparation, really.
That's right. That's right. It's not something we recommend on either Jonathan's or my channel. All we're saying is that for people that are going to competition, this is what they do, which is extreme cuts in order to get there, which means excessive exercise. Obviously, you need a coach to properly, because you can get plateaus, and people like Jonathan that know how to do it, know how to break plateaus to be able to push through. So if somebody wants to achieve body composition and achieve a breakthrough on plateaus and stuff like that, they should consult with Jonathan. Just go to his channel. He's got links there where you can actually consult, and he can actually then provide you a plan how to achieve that and how to deal with those sort of issues, especially people that for some reason want to do competition or just are struggling with body composition issues. Anyway, I thought I'd throw that in. Since
Cheers, yeah.
I usually recommend you and Bart for, depending on what, for general health stuff, it's usually Bart. For addictions, it's usually Pim, because I just don't have the time, having a day job, to do those sort of things anymore.
Of course, yeah.
Anyway, let's just cover this. Does it stand to reason that as glucagon becomes more dominant, blood sugar levels may go slightly higher? What do you think, Jonathan?
Well, glucagon's trying to raise catecholamines and the cortisol response in the body. When you do that, usually the blood glucose will rise because it anticipates that you're about to do some activity. So it make me think that if glucagon has risen too much in response to a high insulin level, then the blood glucose level would be slightly higher from that point. So it's an interesting question, but what do you think, Harry? I mean, this is more your sort of field.
Look, glucagon, while glucagon signaling, we have to actually call it what it is. We're talking about insulin signaling and glucagon signaling. The level of the signaling that will actually will depend on the substrates of food that are coming in. They will either lower the signaling or increase the signaling of these hormones. So it's not just that they work like independently. These are synergies, interactions. That's why I talk about the insulin to glucagon ratio. So if you have, let's say you're in a fasted state, your insulin to glucagon, that means the amount of insulin compared to glucagon will be 0.8 in terms of insulin to 1 glucagon. So for 1 molecule of glucagon, you will have 0.8 of a molecule of insulin. That's how it works. If you're in a low carb state, consuming just meat and fat, nothing else, no glucose or practically no glucose, then it will be a 1.3. Maybe if you're eating very high protein, it may get up to 1.5. If you're just having pure potato diet, which is still basically not engaging the Randall cycle, you'll get a 4-to-1 of insulin to glucagon. You'll still get glucagon, but the only time only when you engage the Randall cycle, you can get insulin 70-to-1 and just push glucagon into the toilet. And obviously that's just a protective mechanism. You don't want more glucose since you've got shitloads in the system anyway. That's understandable. You've got far too much. That's why insulin is so high and glucagon is so suppressed as a consequence. These are just normal responses. These are interacting signaling hormones based on what is the energy substrates in the system. This is how these things work. Now, this whole notion, unless for glucagon to be dominant, you have to have 0 insulin. That's only a type 1 diabetic. And a type 1 diabetic who's got uncontrolled diabetes. And only then. But if you're basically just eating, you're getting enough energy from fat. And that's the thing with a type 1 diabetic. They need to consume slightly more fat. to be able to regulate glucagon properly. So you're only producing, you're not having an overexpression of glucagon. It's really critical. So once you put enough fat in, glucagon is tempered, which is a good thing. So because it does respond to energy as well. So that's why when fasting happens, you've got less energy and you've got more free fatty acids that are flowing. That's why glucagon will go much higher. But at the moment you throw in there more energy in terms of exogenous fat, it will temper it, which is what you want. And that's why a number of people who are type 1 don't seem to have this problem and seem to be able to regulate their blood glucose levels in their system, and they don't get over too much gluconeogenesis. That's for type 1s. Anyone else who's non-type 1, which is the majority of the population, pretty much if you're in a low carbohydrate state, you'll only get demand-driven glucose. That's it. You won't get enough above basal. If I'm sitting on a seat doing no physical activity or whatever, I will basically, my blood sugar all day will be, you can actually put a glucose monitor and it will just be like flatline. And it doesn't matter how much protein you consume or how much the fat to protein or whatever. If you're in a low carbohydrate state where insulin for most of the time is fairly low, so you have a big meal like an OMAD or 2 meals a day, for the majority of the other day, other than the slight increase through leucine, the slight increase, it's a spike and then it comes down, you're not going to get much more insulin in the system. And glucagon will basically be tempered to the level that's required. The moment the body suspects or anticipates, even psychologically, you're actually sending signals that you're about to do some physical activity. It's like when you actually put some food in your mouth and there's glucose in it. Immediately the body senses, oh, there's glucose coming. I better increase insulin. It's the same thing. I'm having a thought that I'm going to do some exercise. So actually having the thought of doing exercise, even when you don't do the exercise, you will actually increase. It's a bit like the effect of, how can I put it, the effect of a non-sugar alcohol, like a sweetener. Even though glucose isn't coming in, the erythritol, which is a breakdown product of fructose glucose metabolism, it's still, even though it's not, it will slightly have an effect, a very light effect on insulin signaling. Why? Because it's saying, something sweet's coming in. Well, it's the same thing with a lot of things that come into the body. The system sort of gets itself ready. I need to produce a bit more glucose because this person is about to do exercise and they will need additional glucose for their muscles. So your blood sugar goes slightly up. Just, I beg anybody doing a test, check their blood sugar, have thoughts of doing exercise, just thoughts, and test themselves. They will see their blood sugar going up, unless you're an alien. Are you an alien from Area 51? Just asking. So
it is true. It is completely true. I've looked before at this, like my blood sugar levels before exercise, and I'm like, why is it creeping up like 1.5 points? I've not actually done anything. I'm sat in the same position I was earlier. It's just I've written my workout plan on a sheet or something. It's weird.
Your body's anticipating that it will require this energy for the muscles. That's why gluconeogenesis goes up. If it's not anticipating anything, it's going, well, he's not interested in doing anything really physical. Basal level is enough. Through GLUT1, you get anything that's required. It doesn't require insulin, GLUT1. But the moment you start thinking, you start producing more glucose and secreting a bit of insulin as well. In anticipation that is going to, require some signaling there to happen. The body is an interesting, system.
Yeah.
the brain body connection is real.
I believe so. Yeah, 100%.
Rentu, how are you, mate?
So about the
We're a star
yogurt
too.
guys. Yeah, I've got a very sensitive microphone. It's very highly tuned, so it picks up everything basically. You can hear a pin drop with my microphone. But yeah, I'll try and mute it next time I start swallowing some food.
A statement from Necro. I'm just grounding nice fresh lamb chops. I love lamb chops, and preparing my next kombucha batch while listening to you guys. Sounds bloody good. I have to say, my favourite two meats is lamb and pork.
Thought so.
For those, yeah, anybody else there that says beef is the best?
There's a good one.
Yes, I'm a bit like that. Is it okay to work out 30 minutes after having breakfast of 250 grams of Bulgarian yogurt and 50 grams of butter, or should I wait longer? Or yours?
That's a good question.
Finish
Yeah.
my coffee.
Yeah, I think it depends on your digestive rate. So someone like me would eat that meal. Half an hour later, yeah, I could probably go to the gym and feel all right. I personally don't like to chance it there. I don't like to think, okay, in half an hour time I'm going to be doing a workout. I might be a bit bloated. I might be a bit congested, that sort of thing. Now, you've picked some very nutrient-dense, very anabolic foods here, so it's pretty good pre-workout. It's a good idea to have a dairy pre-workout, I think. It might help with the hormonal signalling. I'd go by feel, so try it half an hour before. If you seem to think you're a bit bloated, you can't breathe properly, your lungs are a bit congested, then, try it an hour and a half. I think for most people, someone think between maybe an hour and 2 hours is probably good. But some people I know train better fasted, so I don't think there's a rule of thumb, but you should judge your dietary frequency, your patterns by your hunger signals and how you perform in the gym if your goal is to perform well in a gym.
I find it much easier as well to, if I'm training or doing any sort of strenuous exercise, I find it actually easier not to be in an unfed state. Even if I've had, let's say, some food a couple of hours earlier, but just prior to, I'm not really into it. It just doesn't sit really well with me. I just feel uncomfortable bending or doing certain things. It just seems like I'm trying to get the body to do too many things at the same time. It's trying to use a whole lot of energy to digest, while at the same time I'm trying to use energy to do other things. Our tribal people would go out and, hunt animals in a fasted state. They would not basically be physically exerting themselves and picking up the animal and carrying it back. So they're in a fasted state before they actually eat. They're more relaxed, because you're actually also want the parasympathetic nervous system to be engaged. So when you're digesting better under those circumstances, they used to be around the campfire, talking about the day, and just laughing and just having some good conversations in that regard, and being eased and enjoying the food, and that's what people used to do. There was even in bygone years, people would sit around a table. I've been in rural areas in Greece when I was youngster in the 70s and all that. You just sit around a table. You'd have worked in the morning and all that, picked up stuff, or my auntie had tobacco, and so you'd put it through the machine, because it would actually, you stack all the tobacco leaves one on top of the other in certain ways, then run it through the machine, which would just stitch it all together, and then you would hang it so it actually dries in a hothouse. So that's how you actually did it. But after you've done all that for the day, you'd basically sit around in the mid-afternoon and have a really nice hearty meal. You'd have a small snack after you'd come back from the farm. You'd have a little light meal, then get on with it, start doing some of the work, and then you'd sit and enjoy. And I think that's a hell of a lot easier to do, and it would be something light, where if you're going to do a lot of physical work, you really don't want the body to be in that sort of state where it's trying to do too many things. Is what I think. It's been
digestion is
Jonathan.
Yeah, digestion's a big one. Like I said, if you're not digesting the food properly, what's the point? You're not utilizing the nutrients that you put in. Yeah. And you'll never train maximally if your stomach's full of food. So the digestive rate comes into it a lot. Now this is quite a small meal for a lot of people, 300 gram meal. For me that might be fine, but then for Anika that might be too much. So just trial and error, but it depends on the food source as well. If I have, for example, steak versus ground beef, that's going to have a different digestive rate as well.
Yeah, precisely. Things that are broken down a bit more will digest a bit faster. So, yeah, that's true. So that's why things like, you could say, like whey will actually go through your system much faster, So it's that probably an hour or half an hour before, maybe is an option, but I don't think some of the other stuff, the more food, I think it just complicates and detracts from the training. Anyway, another doctor was talking about mold toxins in food. And of course, he mentioned grains, legumes, and nuts. Yes, they do tend to be there. But also your beloved dairy. Yeah. Look, if you expose dairy, it can get mold. Let's not forget that some cheeses are made with in certain ways to have mold in them. Blue cheese and stuff like that. So in that regard. But there's also traditional methods where you can coat with either olive oil around and let it dry and it becomes like a sticky thing, or there are a number of preparation methods like a sort of like waxy type material that is primarily used from the sort of beehive sort of waxy material that can be used to coat around cheeses and stuff like that. And obviously putting it in a dry place. I know in the islands, for instance, they'll put it under the home because it's one of the driest parts of, so you get a lot of ventilation and it's really dry and it sort of prevents any mold and stuff like that. It's probably more of a problem for cheeses if you're trying to produce cheeses in regions which are more wet compared to drier regions like the Mediterranean. Is drier, it's going to have less issues. In wetter regions, it may be a problem. So if you're getting cheeses from certain regions of the world that are wetter, tend to be wetter. Now, alpine regions are not the problem because they're not wet, they're not humid. They are they're either cold, or very sort of hot environments that are dry environments tend to not have this problem with mold. It tends to be in wetter type environments. Now, the majority of the regions that actually cheeses are produced around the world tend to be either these sort of colder sort of climates, or which is mountainous climates in the temperate zones, or they tend to be in regions where they're much drier, like in the Mediterranean and stuff like that. So in those sort of regions, it's less of a problem. But in wetter regions, mold is a bigger problem. We know that in regions like China, the level of mold in Central America, regions like the Amazon and regions like that, methods of preparation sometimes in those regions can mean that that the foods coming from those regions can have a slightly higher mold levels. That's And we know that also, I mean, even in the China study, they actually identified this in these sort of regions of China where the level of sort of mold in some of the toxins related to it in certain populations were much higher than other populations. So these are not new sort of things and all that. So to just say blanket that dairy everywhere is going to be the same, no. If it's from regions that are much like, if you were to go to India, subtropical India, those sort of area, or tropical India, where it's way more humid, dairy there, if left for too long, can potentially accumulate mold. That's the reason why in the subcontinent, as it's called, the Indian subcontinent, they don't really make cheese. They pretty much focus on fresh milk. The most they'll make the yogurt on the day and consume it, or they'll consume the milk, or they'll make clarified butter, which is ghee, for purposes of cooking and stuff like that. So, and they usually try and they seal it properly to prevent any molding happening to the clarified butter. So usually there are methods. So it's in regions where, if people who are not, how can I put it? Let's say somebody from the West goes to the subcontinent and tries to do these preparations without understanding the environment and having, understanding the food culture and how people prepare foods within a certain environment, they may end up producing product that may have more mold than it should, than what the locals would produce. So yes, that is possible in that regard. But to make a blanket statement that dairy is going to be a problem, that's nonsense. Now, why are legumes, grains, and grains from those regions more susceptible? Simple. These things, once they're actually collected by the farmer, they're stored to some extent before they're actually sold. In storage, obviously, they are susceptible because they're not fresh, they're stored, and they are susceptible to some level of molding in these environments. And that's the reason for it. It's the same thing with coffee from these regions, the same thing with, coffee, cacao, cocoa beans. Most of these things are all susceptible to some level of molding. It varies and all that. There are some sites that do third-party testing for some of these products, but since we're carnivores, we don't really consume most of these foods. It's less of an issue. The dairy side, as I said, as long as you're pretty much getting it from dry or cold climates where there isn't any mold, if you're getting it from mountainous regions in the Alps and places like that, things are either going to be cold or quite dry. Even in the summer periods, it's quite dry in these regions. It's the reason why they're very vulnerable, the pine trees, for burning as well, because it tends to be, you get these extremes because you're in that sort of environment. Now, as far as sort of the wetness that you may get in some regions in the northern parts of Europe, especially in the British Isles or in parts of Scandinavia, there may be potential problems there for molding, depending on how things are prepared and stuff like that. So that's a question mark on that sort of stuff as far as dairy goes from those regions. But nowadays, because a lot of it's done, it's collected fresh on the day, goes to a factory, and a lot of it's very controlled in sort of good room temperatures and stuff like that, dry environments and all that in those factories. I don't think it's going to be a problem, personally. Jenna, hello. What do you think about Cerule? Stem Enhance, which Bart is promoting. I've read on forums from some people that took it that it did not help them at all. Well, it depends. If you're young and you're producing enough stem cells, well, you're not going to notice much difference. Let's put it that way. So, but if you're older, now Bart would claim that even if you're young, you're going to get some benefit because you'll be replacing damaged cells with healthier cells. And so long-term, potentially, you'll have less senescence. So as you're aging forward, you'll have less senescence to deal with. And so if you've got less senescence, you'll end up in the long run having a lower senescent threshold as you age, in a sense. Now, obviously, there's no research based on it. That is an extrapolation, so we need to be honest about that. It's an extrapolation in that regard. Possibly for people who've got a lot of mitochondrial damage, who have got a lot of issues with a lot of cellular damage over years of inappropriate dieting and inappropriate foods and stuff like that. Obviously, for those people, there are advantages for products like this. It's not only Serol, it's Physotin senolytics to kill off senolytic cells. It's taurine that actually can reduce senescence and also help force apoptosis. Serol can also cause apoptosis of certain bad cells as well. So some of these polyphenols or different substances have benefits. So obviously, the older you are, the more benefits you'll get from these sort of products. The younger you are, less damage, the less amount. So it's really that. And then it's at the end of the day, it's really up to you whether you want to. These are biohacks, remember, guys. This is not, you've got a standard diet, and we know that somebody can be on a carnivore diet for all their life, like a Maasai and all that, live in their 120 odd age and even be reproductive as a male in their 70s plus. So we know, but none of us have lived a clean, pristine life from birth or earth or grounded ourselves and poured up electrons to stabilize, because what is an antioxidant? An electron donor. So what is an oxidative stress? It's actually the loss of electrons from tissue. So when you're taking up electrons, grounding, and these people are doing it 24/7. All their life. One, they're on a low inflammatory diet and even small amounts of inflammation. And this is why they're so robust. As the lady, Mary Ruddock, that I've interviewed, and there's one of my playlists on Blue Zones, and she actually explains a lot of this sort of stuff, how these people are so robust. You don't die from a disease or don't get eaten by some cat or some animal, get stomped on. You can remain very robust. She couldn't keep up with an 80-year-old. And she's in her mid-40s and can sit low carb, keto, quite fit for her age bracket for Western standards. But for Maasai standards, she's below par, and that just shows the different level of what we are. So, I say to people that if you want to use some of these products, I mean, even though I promote some of these products myself, I don't sell them, but I do promote them, and I do promote taurine, I do promote senolytics like Physotin and other things like that. At the end of the day, I've just given, all I do is provide you the information, like Bart says. This is what the information shows, that this can actually, cleave off a certain protein and allow more adult stem cells to be released from your bone marrow. And then on the other hand, you can take, where taurine only produces stem cells in the brain, so in your brain cavity, doesn't produce them in the periphery. So, but in the brain it does. So you can use taurine, you can use Serol for the periphery, you can use senolytics like Physotin and enhance it by taking it at night. So it can, because pretty much you get an amplification from melatonin in the evening, and that can kill off. It has a killing off rate of 680% increase in the kill off rate of senescent and cancer cells in your body. So you can use these biohacks, and depending on the level of damage you've got in your body, then some of these products may be useful for you. If you've got low damage and you don't have a problem, you may say, well, I'm just going to stick to a carnivore diet and not use any of these products. But somebody who may be my age or older and has a lot of damage and problems in that regard, some of these products could be useful. If you want to produce new cells that are healthy cells to fix things in your body, they can be useful. So it really depends on your circumstances, whether you go for a product or not. Now, Bart used it for his macular degeneration that he had. He's reversed that with Serol products. So it's quite clear that it's worked for him. And as he says, you don't know where the stem cells are going to go. He was just lucky that he had more damage there and less there and less anywhere else. Had he had a bad heart like I had, then it would have gone to the heart. It would have prioritized the heart over the eye. So he would have lost his vision, but his heart would be healthy. So you don't know where it's going to go. And that's the problem, where you've got the damage or where you even noticed you've got the damage. So you may be saying, well, I've taken it. It hasn't really helped my eyes, but it could be helping your heart or some other system that you're not aware of. So, it's really hard to gauge how this product is working because, unfortunately, stem cells that get released in the body, we don't know where they go. We don't control them. The body will prioritize how the body thinks, well, what is important? My heart needs to work. My brain needs to work. I can do without my eyes, but if I lose my brain or my heart, I'm dead. So it will basically do a triage and say, what are the critical systems that need to be healed? So if you've got other things that need to be healed, you may need to take it longer to heal those other parts, and then it will heal the stuff that you're possibly interested. So that's the problem. It's not a targeted therapy. It's a biohack, but not a targeted therapy. So you need to keep that in mind. It's a bit like even body protection compound 157. Now that will help all the collagen structures through your body. So if you take it orally, it will go everywhere to all of them. So you may get a bit of help in a bad knee or whatever. But if you want to help like a specific tissue type, you get better results with injectable directly into the area. So you get the highest concentration around that tissue. You can't really do that with Serol because it's going to the bone marrow to release stuff, and then so you can't target, you can't create an injectable Serol, so to speak. It's just one of those things.
Yeah, I think what he said is
unless you want to
the
say
same thing, really. I mean, the only thing I'd add is whenever you're taking any supplement, any product, any nutraceutical, do a whole body assessment of yourself. So from head to toe, how you feel, give yourself a mark out of 10. You might be surprised because I've had this before where I've tried like taurine, for example, in the past, and I thought, I don't know if it will do much. Then it turns out I didn't do a lot for my body head to toe, other than I slept a bit better, my digestion was a bit better, my training performance was much better. So sometimes it's not something you always, like I said, it's not something you always look for, I want to improve, I don't know, my hair or something, or my skin. Sometimes these products will do something else, which is quite a good point. Yeah, I'm gonna go now anyway, Harry, because I've got a meeting and a thingy.
Yep, not a problem, mate. Thanks for dropping in.
Yeah, cheers.
My
cheers for having me on.
And the kids. So
will do. Yeah. Hopefully next time I get more time and I can
thanks for,
say some things and stuff.
Not a problem. Thanks for your contributions. Take care, mate.
Take care, guys. Bye.
See ya. Anyway, let's move on. Johnny, hi Harry. Do you know about Bifido infantis? Does? Yeah, it's just another one of those. Look, it does help with a number of things in the body. It can help also with degrading certain things like oxalate as well. It's one of the beneficial bacteria. There's a lot of things that are said that it helps, in the body. It seems to sort of suppress some of the pathogenic stuff. It seems to affect sort of the level of candida and stuff like that. So it does seem to have a number of benefits. Look, a lot of these things were done in petri dish where they put things in and then they saw, but that's not an in vivo inside an organism. So it's really hard to experiment on these. This is why we don't know enough about the gut microbiome. And I usually say to people, look, guys, I can say definitively when you have lower levels of bifidobacteria or the lactobacillus strains, you tend to have higher pathogenic bacteria and more inflammation in the gut. This is what we know. But specific strains, there's a lot of association, but it's not very clear whether it's just this one. And the biggest problem with mechanistic studies in vitro, like in Petri dish, it's really hard to know, because we do know that in the gut environment, these things can also be affected, the way they function, by viruses, because viruses can infect some of these strains, well, most of the strains of bacteria. And we do have millions and millions of viruses that we come in contact from within our environment. They don't do us harm because they don't have they can't lock onto receptor sites within the body, us humans, but they can lock onto receptor sites in the bacteria or in the fungi like Candida or stuff like that. And so there is a bit of a war amongst them in there. It doesn't affect us in any negative way, generally speaking. So it's really quite complicated to know. I sort of like, I used to, there's a few, things like some of the lactobacillus strains like rhamnosus, which, can actually increase testosterone slightly, can actually increase, the amount of sperm you have, and so can Dietary. They can do those sort of things. Plus, they can do a number of other things like reducing some of the pathogenics, suppressing them. So they're good in that regard. But a lot of the other stuff are associated. And this is the biggest problem, is they seem to be associated with certain other additional benefits, but it's not clear whether it's a synergy or on their own or how much. So it's a really hard thing. I tend to say to people, let's regulate the gut. So I've moved away, even though I will promote that Dietary strain and some of the rhamnosus strains and stuff like that to certain people when they actually send me an email or they leave me a comment and they say, Harry, I've got this. What do you think? And I say, well, you could try this to deal with it. If somebody has a problem with like insomnia and they've had COVID and their bifidobacteria levels have dropped quite a bit, I would encourage them then to get some bifidobacteria to restore their levels, to reduce the oxidative stress in their gut, because that can be a problem when you've got too much Firmicutes. I've done a video which covers the vegan myths and falsehoods. I do cover the difference between the two big groups, which is the bifidobacteria and the Firmicutes. And so you need both, but you need slightly less Firmicutes and slightly more bifidobacteria. And then all the other small, like lactobacillus and some of the other strains are other minor players, but they do have their importance from what we've seen. But primarily, these are the big ones. Now, COVID does reduce, and it seems also the jab as well seems to reduce the bifidobacteria. In some people, it doesn't affect them at all. So like a bell curve. In the majority of people, it affects them to some degree. In a smaller minority, it affects them severely. It literally nearly wipes out their whole bifidobacteria. And they end up with severe insomnia as well. That's probably the serotonin side of things, and that probably is causing some chemistry derangements in their brain. But it seems to basically have, these effects. They can't calm down, that is. So it seems to have these problems. Now, a carnivore diet generally does modulate the gut microbiome much better. Now, there are a number of proteins, some of the amino acids, that can actually have a modulating effect on the gut microbiome. But the biggest one is the sulfur peptide, which is what we call taurine. That one, actually, I've done what's the molecule that actually regulates the digestion and all that. There is a video in my digestive issues playlist, and it covers exactly the mechanisms, how through inflammasome and AMP, so how it actually regulates the gut microbiome and the inflammation pathways within that. It lowers histamine inside the gut, so mast cell activation is lowered, and also it lowers spermidine, so it lowers things that actually cause the overgrowth of bacteria, which is what we get with SIBO and things like that. So taurine has that effect, and so do the bile salts produced from the taurine choline sort of nutrients in the animal food. So animal foods tend to basically improve gut microbiome function, but there are things that also are causing damage to the gut microbiome. They can be viruses, and they can be other pathogens in the environment. They can also be things like mold. They can also be, just general stress itself can actually have deleterious effects on your gut microbiome and all that sort of stuff. So Bifido infantis, it depends on the strain as well. There are certain strains that have more benefits than others. You have to remember all bacteria. So you'll have basically like a major grouping, which is called Firmicutes or Bifidobacteria or Lactobacillus, and then you'll have specific within that family. You'll have specific types. And those types may be Lactobacillus acidophilus or rhamnosus or reuteri. And then there'll be specific strains, and they'll have a specific number. So not all infantis has the same effects. Some can have positive effects and some can have negative effects. And the same thing with acidophilus as an example. So some acidophilus strains can actually lower appetite. Some can increase it. Guess which one the food industry puts into the yogurts? Most yogurts, especially the sweetened ones, because these ones prefer a lot of sweetness, so they have to put more sweetness in. It's the strains that actually increase the appetite. So that's a problem with a lot of the commercial yogurts out there. So they're using, well, if you use some of the other strains, which would have been the traditional strains that a lot of traditional artesian yogurts were made in the traditional way, they actually increase the satiety and lower, so it depends which strain. So the same thing with infantis. There are so many strains. Tell me which strain. If you tell me a specific strain, some of them I can remember, some I'll have to look up. I can't remember. I've got a list of a whole lot of them, what they affect and what they do, but it varies quite a bit even within. So when you do ask in future, ask me for a specific strain and give me the number. By seeing the number, then I know exactly that it's this strain. And if I know about it, I'll tell you. If I don't know, I'll say, look, I'll look it up, So, it's impossible to know every single strain that exists out there. But remember, you've got a family, a type, and then a strain. So those are the three sort of things. And so when we're talking about a specific strain, we have to have the number attached to it. When we're not talking about a strain, then we're talking about a type, and that type can have varied properties. Now, some types the whole grouping of that type but all the strains, that is, can basically have very similar effects. But in some types, they can vary. Infantis is one of them. Acidophilus is another. Rhamnosus seems to have much tighter similarities. There are variations even in Rhamnosus, but less. Reuteri seems to have different, similar effects. Some less, but they're not doing anything negative in Reuteri. But there are some that are, have very little effect, and then others that have really strong effect in suppressing pathogenic bacteria. It depends. Like I remember the Gaia type that I talk about in some of my videos, and one of the strains, the DSM, 11896, I think it is. Can't remember off the top of my head. I think I may be wrong. That one basically has a stronger effect than the other one. So yeah, it's complicated when it comes to stuff, and a lot of that is basically in petri dish. So inside the actual the animal or us, with competition with other strains and with viruses affecting its energy production and going in there and stealing some of its energy and affecting it, how well it works inside the human body. I can take the same supplement and have a bell curve varied level of effect inside me. And so I tend to say, I go from first principles. Let's regulate the gut microbiome with animal foods, with taurine and stuff like that, and, with animal foods. And usually things will settle. And only if we've gone and done some tests, like a gut microbiome test, and we've, let's say we've had COVID, and we suspect, I've got insomnia. I can't get to sleep. Maybe I've lost a lot of my bifidobacteria. Then I go and do a test and I find that my bifidobacteria is in the toilet. Then I will supplement for that. But if I'm not having any of those problems, then I go, well, it hasn't affected me in that regard, and I must have enough. I'll just support it with the right sort of foods. So it's that sort of stuff. I don't recommend, you could say, these sort of supplements unless somebody actually needs them, and we've actually identified a problem and actually identified exactly what is required. So they've actually done testing. They've come back to me and said, look, Harry, I went and did a test with my doctor. These are the sort of results. I'm missing this, this, and this. These are the sort of symptoms I'm having, blah, blah, blah. And then I'll say, okay, I know some really high quality, preparations, and I'll provide those links to people, and then they'll go and purchase these things and do a 3-month sort of, recolonization into their system. So it depends on what you need. I don't want people wasting money when you can actually re-regulate with good nutrition and taurine. You can re-regulate your gut microbiome. Why bother wasting money? I used to buy a lot of this sort of stuff as well for myself, and then I realized, why bother, So it was money down the toilet. I sort of felt if I need stuff, then I can justify it to myself. But you have to basically have tested to know exactly what the situation is, or have certain symptoms that you come to me, somebody like me, and then I'll listen to their symptoms and I say, okay, you may be missing this or this. And let's try these supplements to sort you out. Anyway, I know it's a long-winded question, but it's a complicated issue when it comes to the gut microbiome and all these strains. Anyway, so I'm very prone to infections in the throat and sinuses. All cold flus always start there too. Yes, they do tend. Could that be because my tonsils were cut out as a child? Yes, I have the same problem. You're not the only one. Anyway, to improve the situation, I've found by keeping my vitamin D levels to a good level, and I tend to take about 6 grams of taurine per day, it seems to basically improve my immune response. And even though in the office a lot of viruses go through, and if I do get a bit of an infection or a bit of a throat or sinus, it's going to be very mild, extremely mild. It'll just be 1 or 2 days, and then it will clear out of my system. That's what I find from experience. If I don't, like last time when I didn't take any vitamin D because I was doing, remember, that test, and I kept no vitamin D, and this was in the previous winter, and no taurine, and I did that for about a month, and then I ended up getting COVID from Dad. And even though it wasn't severe, I had a croaky, scratchy throat for about a week after that, but I hit the vitamin D quite hard. So I did 3 days of 50,000 IUs, then I dropped it back down to 10 for the remainder of the week, and then I went back to my normal 5,000 in winter. So that's what I did, and I upped my taurine intake to 12 grams for all those days to really improve, because it actually is protective to the immune system for immunosenescence, because when the immune system is fighting these sort of invaders, it's also going to get damaged. And so by using something like taurine, you can actually reduce the damage to those by reducing the oxidative stress of the immune cells. And that's a good thing. The immune cells will love you for that extra taurine. And it's the same thing when you're actually exercising muscles, oxidative stress goes up. what happens? You get this big rush of taurine coming into the body, into the cells that are affected by this oxidative stress, and immediately it stops it. It's the same thing when, let's say, you've had a heart incident or a brain stroke or whatever. When you get red blood perfusion and blood comes back into that, you get a lot of oxygen coming back, and there's been a lot of damage there. So there's a lot of electrons that have been pulled off some of the tissue. What will happen then, they'll react with the oxygen, and you'll get an increase in oxidative stress. Well, what taurine does is it can actually reduce that. It can suppress that oxidative stress. And it's the same thing that it does. This allows you to exercise for longer and not sustain, injuries and all that. So it gives you stronger. It also lowers lactate levels, which is another part of it. But the key thing here is the oxidative stress. So this is what we do to the immune cells. We reduce their oxidative stress as they're fighting the good fight, and then they can fight stronger and clear out. So it's a sort of a two-prong. And there's a whole lot of receptor sites that are just coated with vitamin D for the immune system. So the immune cells, for more immune cells to be activated and used to basically deal with this, and we want more of the naive. This is the synergy in our thymus. We want to basically have reduced the senescence, and we want more naive T cells and less. And this is where the synergy, where vitamin D will produce more of them, more of the naive ones, and taurine will activate them. So by activating them, you're getting more naive. Now, this is what a younger person tends to have, more naive T cells rather than cytokine ones. And it's the cytokines ones that are produced over time because your immune system is becoming older, aged, and senescent. You get more cytokines being produced by senescent cells, both not only, because I've talked about senescent cells producing cytokine. It's signaling, like saying to the immune system, I'm damaged, get rid of me. It's the same thing for the cytokine releases from damaged immune cells. So we want to sort of reduce those in the body, because cytokine storms are what kills us. It's not the actual disease. It's that response of too many cytokine cells. So we want to reduce the cytokine producing immune cells. We want to reduce that. And this is where the synergy of these two things come into play. And so I always say that that's the best focus. I mean, I'm in the same, because that's a key part of the immune system, your tonsils. And unfortunately, back then they didn't understand this, and they just thought, oh, the easiest thing is just chop it out. It's like the appendix. It's like the holder of your original gut microbiome. So if you take antibiotics or whatever, or your gut microbiome gets damaged, you can restore your gut microbiome from your appendix, because it's still there, it's stored. But if you're getting inflamed because you get too many pathogenic bacteria in your and it's able to, and more are able to go in there, penetrate, which usually they're not. They're usually the body can protect. But in some people, they tend to be, it's like that bell curve, a bit more vulnerable. Now, obviously, if these people basically that have got that ability to basically restore the gut microbiome faster, but also produces a susceptibility for them that they can actually get infections of an inflamed appendix. So they, it's the old cecum, the big that used to ferment things in the apes. It's just a shrunken down cecum. And this is the problem. So for these sort of people, in doing a traditional, tribal type lifestyle, they wouldn't have had this problem. It's just our modern things where we're eating a lot of processed garbage and all that. We derange. This is why even the amount of, appendix and stuff like that has also escalated in more recent years. A lot of diseases have escalated. I mean, cancer now in Australia, they're talking about over 65, 2 in 5 will have cancer. That's 40%. It's horrific. 40% of the elderly over 65 will have cancer in their life at least once. That's a catastrophe in the elderly, and very costly catastrophe, because oncology costs a lot of money. oncology therapy. So these are the damn problems that we face. I know I'm ranting now because these are things that do annoy me. For it's like people that are obese, then all these sort of redesigning the digestive tract and causing deficiencies in the other health problems. Drives me crazy, modern allopathic medicine, the way it operates. Acute care, in emergency, fantastic. No problems with that. But all the other sort of stuff is over-medicalized and profit-motivated, and it's causing a lot of health problems. Yeah, but I know, you just have to basically maintain in the higher, your vitamin D levels need to be at the higher end of normal. So, within the normal range, but further up in the normal range. And you also need to maintain, when you do get these problems, go slightly higher on the taurine. That will help your immune system. Anyway, I'm abused and often many years, still get anxious before my concerts. Yep. Yeah, I know. Yeah, look, I think a large majority of us are like that to some extent. Yes, luckily it only lasts for a few minutes just before, when you get your name introduced, you go, gulp. Now let's get out there and start talking. Easy as Ollers, how are you, mate? Raymond! Yes, Jonathan's gone. Yes, but good to have you here. Michael, always a pleasure. Coconut oil seems okay to cook with, but I presume Ted would not be happy. He's on his way with his bucket of water and his frogs. Yes, so yes, and you're not very far away. Remember, Michael. So he's on the other side of the pond, so he's not too far away. So expect him sometime this evening late. He usually appears late. He'll sort you out. Yes, you definitely won't be happy. Yes, if you had something like shredded coconut and coconut cream, plant material. Oh, exactly. Yes, and those phytosterols as well, not good for you. Yes. Unless you're a Polynesian and you have the ability to genetics to deal with the excess phytosterols. Most of us don't. But probably you will slightly better because you do come from the Mediterranean like I do. So we have slightly better. It's probably more of a problem. And you wouldn't have a problem with salicylates like I don't. Most Mediterranean people don't. So you wouldn't have the same problem. Northern Europeans there are more people that have got salicylate problems and can't tolerate either high amounts of phytosterols or salicylates. So that can be a problem. But yes, you will get, he will be appearing tonight in your home. So yes, I don't envy you. I feel sorry for you. I know he's quite vicious. I've got a little Tassie devil here at home just in case he appears. I've got to have some protection. But yeah, I'm terrified of him as well. Believe me. Yes, evil bear. I better not say that too loud, just in case he's listening. Yes. Johnny, I have a friend who has blood in their stool whenever they have some plant food, such as onions or tomatoes. Yep. Well, they, nightshades, they may be susceptible to nightshades. There are a number of different compounds that you can be susceptible in onions. Yeah, so it's really hard to say. There are some bacteria that do like the sulfurs coming from onions, and especially if you've got derangement in your gut microbiome, they can actually tend to grow, so they can be a problem. So that could be an issue. Also, it may not be bleeding. It just maybe because if they're having them together, onions and tomatoes, it more likely is the tomato that's the problem, and it's probably nightshades that can't actually handle them very well. And so they're probably, to some extent, pooing part of that, so it hasn't been properly digested, the tomato, and it's probably the sauce or whatever, and it's probably coming out in the stool, and it may not be blood at all. So, hard to say exactly. But these things can, in some people, induce some level of oxidative stress, and that can have a deleterious effect on the colon cells, and that potentially could cause the colon cells to, bleed, and that could be the consequence of that inflammation caused by a reaction to some of these foods. So that's, I would, to work out which you're reacting to, the best thing would be to fast for a day or for at least half a day. Then consume one of these foods and see what happens the next morning. So you've actually haven't eaten for 24 hours. Then you consume just tomatoes or just onions, and then look at the stool the next day and see if they're what effect one or the other had in that regard. So yeah, that's probably the only way of working out what's causing what, and to discern, because it's really hard otherwise. The other way to do it is going to a naturopath and doing a sensitivity check, where they can look at the sensitivity to different foods that you react to. So that could be another option for that person if they don't want to do the fasting experiment or whatever, because you need if not at least, if I was fasting, I'd be doing it for 48 hours to clear out my bowels properly, and then I would take just that food, then see what happened, and then I would do another 48 hours to really clean my insides, and then take that and the other food to see how I reacted, to do it properly. But it's not an easy thing to do for some people, especially if they're on more carbohydrates. It's very hard to fast for that long. So for most people, it'll take them, and at least potentially up to 3 days before they can even get into proper ketosis, and they could be feeling ravenous over those days, and really their energy could tank severely. So it's really hard to do. So I would generally recommend to go to a naturopath and do an actually sensitivity test and see whether they have sensitivity to these things. Because if you're coming from Southeast Asia, I suspect the tomatoes, as a nightshade which originates in South America, is most likely the culprit than the onions. Hey Harry, why do you recommend a 1-to-1 protein and fat for men, and would it be less optimal to have higher fat than that? Well, generally speaking, because men need more protein. We've got bigger protein structures in our body. It's pretty much it. If you're having a 1-to-1, you're sort of, even though photonic energy, which is what calories are, is not a really accurate sort of measure, but you're sort of getting some sort of a 69 to 31% ratio in that sense. That's what you're actually getting, and so you're getting more than enough protein for protein synthesis, which is for bones and for muscles. You're getting enough amino acids for the enzymes and the polypeptides that you're actually going to be transcripting in your body. You're going to be generating so that. And then the third part, the organs, your heart, your liver, all these other organs, they also require amino acids. If you don't get enough amino acids, you'll get atrophy of your kidneys or atrophy of your heart or atrophy of different organs. Obviously, some organs will atrophy more than others, depending on their priority in the way the body will triage and say, okay, I need this, this, and this. So yes, so there is a certain requirement which is much higher. Women, their frame is different. They have lower, slightly lower requirements of protein, and so for them around 20 to 25% is fine in that regard. So for them, I usually say a 1 to 0.8 fat to protein. So slightly more, like you could say 20 odd percent more. And the reason for that is because women have higher requirements for their own hormonal system. So that's the difference. And also they have lower requirements for protein. We're not talking about now 10% or or lower or stuff like that, like the nonsense that we see in the RDIs, but we're saying they have slightly lower requirements in that regard. So I usually tend to say for women, 1.7 to 1.8. For men, 2.2. So that's the sort of difference and all that. So the 1-to-1 is a rough measure. It's not a perfect measure. It's a rough measure. There's going to be a whole lot of reasons why you may need more or less or whatever. So if you're sedentary, if you're basically somebody who doesn't do a lot of physical activity, just walking and general stuff like that, some light stuff, or like me, I just weight train once a week. That's about it. I don't do much. So under those sort of circumstances, I usually do about 2.2 grams. Sometimes I may do a bit less, like 2 grams or 1.9. But try to hit about 2.2 for myself to maintain my, muscularity and my muscles. So, so that's, and, for a 57-year-old, I've got good muscles, even though I'm only training once a week. So, they're substantial size, so, and this is wide, as you can see, against my face. So, doesn't take excessive amounts. Obviously, if I wanted to really build up, I also have genes that actually, so I've got slightly lower myostat, and I also have genetics that tend to predispose me to build way easier than others. So I do have that advantage. So I don't have to do as much. If I just give myself protein, more leucine and stuff like that, I will build up more muscle more rapidly, even without exercising. So I'm one of those lucky people. It's probably because I've got these higher on one of the 85 percentile in terms of Neanderthal DNA, the percentage. And they used to be stockier, and I tend to be a stocky person and more muscular, sort of heavier in the upper body. And I also even my legs, I'll have, they're actually larger than other people. Where Bart, for instance, he's probably got far less, and he's just like that. They're like tubes, So yeah, there's there's those sort of differences, calf muscles and all that. For me, I've never exercised them. They're just naturally large, so it's genetics. So I tend to be one of those people that tend to require more protein. If I'm training, I'll push it up to 3 or 4 grams per kilo body weight. So I will push it much higher, and I'll get better results. But unless you wouldn't go any higher. But you do need the extra, as I said, to provide you for all these other things in the body. So while the 1-to-1 is sort of a rough measure, a rough thing that usually is good for most people, if they're eating to satiety and they're getting about a 1-to-1, gram, they tend to basically get fairly good results, most people. If you're training, then your protein requirements are going to go much higher. If you want to do it perfectly, then you have to basically say, if I'm training, If I'm a stockier person that tends to build muscle more, then I should look about 2.2. If not, as a male, I can go from anywhere between 1.8 to 2.2 within that. For women, it's something like 1.6 to 1.8. It's slightly tighter for them. For the reason is because most women don't have that big variation in muscle size. It's very rare in that regard, unless they're doing the juice, otherwise it's very rare. So you don't see that big variety, but in men you do see much more, depending on some of their genetics and stuff like that. That plays a big role as well. But I tend to basically say, well, if I'm not exercising, I'm going to do about 2 grams plus. I usually try to hit 2.2, and then the amount of energy that I require. And if I'm cutting, I'll cut back on the energy to be able to cut. Simple as that. So I use more of my own body fat as an example. So that's a different thing altogether when you're doing a cut. But on the other hand, if I'm actually exercising on a day, I will up my protein about 3 grams plus, because I know, I'll go to failure, which means that I'll exercise hard, shorter amount of time, but hard. I'm absolutely exhausted, nearly falling over. I will literally just, after I finish, I just wander in and just lie on the bed. So I've maxed myself out where I just barely have enough strength to put down the weights. So I really push myself to that max. And on that day, I'm going to go up to 3 grams. Somebody who's big like Jonathan, very large, very tall, very, his requirements are going to be much higher than mine. 4 grams would be ideal for him, and he does much better when he actually consumes more on those training days. So this is the reason. So this is a rough thing for most people, but if you're training, the levels and the requirements are different, and also the timing is going to be different as well. So that's why you should, if you really want to do training, you need to hook up with somebody like and consult with somebody like Jonathan and get into his group. If you're not, then a sort of a roundabout 1-to-1 and satiety is probably fine for the majority of people, and for women, slightly more fat is what is advisable for them. That's sort of the rough sort of measure. So anyway, and always to satiety as much as possible as you can do. What would cause bloating, water retention on an animal-based diet? It can be a number of things. It usually isn't the animal-based diet. It usually is that people have come with pre-existing conditions, and it's probably some level of inflammation in the gut. What exactly the derangement is hard to say. Now, sometimes by taking taurine supplementation, will actually re-regulate the fluids in your body and get rid of the stuff. Other water retention can be that if you're using, like some people may use alcohol sugars, and these alcohol sugars may be raising, spiking insulin, and that can also hold on to fluids. So you don't need a whole very high insulin, because usually the insulin to glucagon is about 1.3 to maybe max, if you're eating a lot of protein, up to 1.5. That's a sort of level of the insulin to glucagon. But if you can get slightly higher, and that tends to be with people that have already got some level of inflammation, some derangement, or they're taking some of these alcohol sugars. And some people seem to have, there is a bell curve on that. Some people have more of an insulin response than others, and so tend to basically hold on to fluids much more, because the only way you can hold on to fluids is by having more insulin in the system that so insulin is what causes the retention. So what's actually driving it, you have to work out how to do it. Sometimes I've actually found with people just fasting for a couple of days, doing a water fast for a couple of days, Get some alpine water, which is much lower in deuterium as well, which is better for your mitochondria. And fasting for a couple of days and consuming less water, just as much to thirst and only to thirst. I don't recommend high amounts in that regard. And by putting a bit of taurine in, that helps with the electrolyte management. So you put it in the water. I usually get a trace mineral. Put a trace mineral when I'm fasting or doing a water fast, and that's what I do. And that will help me then bring down my insulin levels. So let's say I've been a bad boy, naughty Harry, and then alcohol and things like that, and I've sort of raised things. Then let's say I was on a bender for a whole week. I was on holidays, and as a consequence, I really stuffed things up. Then I may have to fast to basically force my insulin levels to much lower level and force myself into ketosis in that regard. So initially, before doing that, because my insulin would be much higher, I'd go low carb, eating more fat in order to maintain my energy levels, because with the higher insulin, you can't release body fat to get energy. So you're going to be basically hypoglycemic. So you need to eat more animal fat to maintain your energy levels. And then you can go into a fast, because as a consequence, your insulin will start lowering and lowering and lowering. You go into a fast, which really will suppress insulin, and then you can re-regulate yourself. Then you come out of the fast by just having, some eggs, or a bone broth or whatever. Then you'll have a bit of meat, not a lot, a bit, because you're very insulin sensitive, and then you'll basically just slowly increase over the day. Later on in the day, more food, and your body will start adjusting itself. And you'll actually notice quite a lot of water loss if you're holding on to fluids when you're fasting. And at that time, obviously, this is where taurine plays a role in trying to hold on to your electrolytes and manage them and regulate them. That's why we use it as a biohack in the water. And we use trace minerals just to add some additional, because you will still get in this fasted state, you will still get some loss. Taurine can't hold on to all of it, because you still require a bit of insulin. Now, taurine does do a bit of insulin signaling at the kidney level, just at the kidney level, and that helps with the ability to recycle these things. But it also helps with lowering the fluids inside the cell. What it does is it pushes fluids out of the cell and lowers them, because it regulates blood pressure. It lowers blood pressure. This is why I've done a video talking about the risks of combining taurine with blood pressure meds. If anybody wants to see that, they should go and see that first. There's a taurine playlist, and that actually covers quite clearly exactly how to deal with blood pressure medication if you're on something like that, Martin. So that's the sort of thing you need to do, and then you can normalize your level of insulin and get proper insulin response. So that's usually what I usually say to people, is you may have not sorted out your internal inflammation, and taurine also will help reduce the inflammation in your gut. And so with a good status, because inflammasome, to work properly as well, you need to have good levels of vitamin D. So if you don't have good levels of vitamin D, your immune system isn't going to function as well. Remember, most of your immune system is in the gut. You got to basically sort that out if it's not working properly. So the tight junctions also get sorted out by vitamin D and by taurine. So the two work synergistically in the gut to sort things out. Now, if you're missing some bacteria, beneficial bacteria, I usually recommend a B complex for 3 months only, and with a pantothenic acid, which is B5, to be less, around about 25 milligrams or less. And the reason for that is because you do retain, it's one of those things that we didn't know you can store it. I have done a video, it's on Bart K's Odyssey channel. I probably should do another one at some stage in the future, but or provide a link to it at least, to Bart's one. I need to find it, which I cover this issue about how pantothenic acid can be stored. What you can get it, if too much over time, you can actually induce, it can affect these cells in the back of your head, in that lower part, and it can actually affect and cause insomnia. So that's the risk. Now, obviously, that's why we shouldn't supplement. We should just get it from the food as much as required, these B vitamins. But if we're lower and we've got bacteria that don't produce enough, we can use the vitamin D that actually helps the bacteria that tend to produce a lot of these B vitamins. Also, we provide the B vitamins for them to grow. They use them and they share them amongst themselves. They grow and they populate, and they are beneficial bacteria. And that can be helpful in actually suppressing the pathogenics and improving the morphology of the gut microbiome. So that's another little hack that you can include in the next 3 months. Do consider that to normalize gut microbiome homeostasis. Anyway, how much taurine did our ancestors get? It varied. It varied a lot in that regard. But remember, our ancestors don't live in a toxic environment. Very different. I'll give you an example. Our ancestors had a low inflammatory diet, a low inflammatory lifestyle. They didn't stress. So they had all these things that were very different than us. And also they took up free antioxidants from the earth, being barefoot and sleeping on the ground. So that helped them reduce oxidative stress. So all these things are completely different. We live differently. We have exposures to mold. They didn't. We have exposures to a number of chemicals. They didn't. We have exposures to too much blue light. It's the reason why I wear these, blue blocking, because that increases cortisol. We also live stressful lives. All they're concerned is, where's the next meal? We, on the other hand, are thinking about, how can I pay my mortgage? How can I pay this? How can I do that? How can I, little Johnny, how, getting, is he going to get into school? Can I afford to send him to a private school? All these are stresses they didn't have. We do. Depending on our lifestyle choices or whatever, we do. The things that we want to do for our family members, all these stresses. It's not the same. So we have a completely different lifestyle. And, our cortisol levels can go much higher. Blue light from these screens can increase cortisol levels at night and lower melatonin. So we don't get good sleep. We don't get good repair and healing. And what does taurine do? Well, it actually increases melatonin and lowers cortisol at night, so you can sleep better. That's why a lot of people take their taurine later in the evening rather than earlier. I take about 6 grams, 2 at 11 o'clock when my cortisol is the lowest. And that's when I also break my fast as well and have a bit of a snack. And then I have an afternoon meal, which is, I just got myself an animal. We cut a bit of, bit of the organs, or we shared a bit of multivitamin around. We had a bit of a raw meat. Then we took the rest. We walked back for a couple of hours to get back to our village. We cooked it. And in the afternoon, sort of 2 to 4 o'clock, we had our meal as tribal people. And then we sat around the campfire talking shit, and then went off to sleep to, do a bit of hanky-panky, that sort of stuff. And then after that, fall asleep. That's the sort of lifestyle. So not very stressful, very different. Their stresses were more pathogens within the environment, completely different. It's probably why they had more ApoE44 type, which is those hyper-responders in the LDLC. It's because they needed to have more higher LDL to deal with the pathogens. We adapted to, in interglacial periods, to certain exposures to plants, more plants in the interglacial periods. And so some of us in certain environments developed some of the other types of ApoE genetics phenotypes, for the simple reason that we had to be able to deal with the additional, minimizing the effects of the renal cycle. So these are the sort of things at the liver level, that is, these are the sort of things, these are adaptations. So it's complicated, but I've covered this in a lot of my videos. And if you look at some of the videos on taurine, I cover a lot of these issues and discuss a lot of these things. So that's the best sources that I can direct you towards. But generally speaking, our ancestors lived very differently than us. Now, it varied quite a bit between our ancestors. Some of our ancestors got far more than others. Now, freshly slaughtered meat has more taurine. You can have per 100 grams, which is 3.53 ounces of meat, you can have up to 400 milligrams of taurine. On the other hand, so you eat, let's say, a kilo of meat, for instance, you could potentially get up to 4 grams. That's the difference. On the other, and also you're sparing methionine for SAMI in the methylation cycle. And you're getting choline to basically turn homocysteine back, and you're sparing folate and B12 to be used, because B12 also plays a role in bone density and stuff like that, but that's for another day to cover that. So if you don't have enough for that because you're overusing the methylation, it can affect your bones, and that can affect osteoporosis and all that. That's another story altogether, but it has an effect. So taurine can actually have a mitigating effect on some of those pathways. That's why it helps with bone density. And on the other hand, by sparing methionine and then choline, it's a synergy. And this is in the animal foods. Choline, oh gosh, that TMAO stuff, I've covered that in videos. It's all nonsense. It's the reverse of what they say. And I provide mechanistic studies and proof for that. So you just have to Google my name, TMAO, and I cover it pretty much. And so this is the way they ate. And then they would eat, we know from the nitrogen 15 studies on tribal people, that they consume some river fish and crustaceans, plus some coastal stuff, depending on where they were on the planet Earth. Now, crustaceans and fish are very high in taurine. What's the problem with our modern food supply? Well, our modern food supply is we don't basically freshly slaughter. Like in the village, you'd have the animal freshly slaughtered, or the animal will be brought in, because there was in the old days, you had a butcher, but there was no damn, slaughterhouses. The butcher had the animals brought in by the farmer in the back, the rear end of the butcher's shop. They'd bring in the animal in the rear area, they'd slaughter it there, and then they'd take it in and freshly cut it up and sell it. Now that animal is much higher in taurine. Today, we don't do that. We slaughter the animal in these slaughterhouses, then we hang them up in refrigerators, because we do have that, and that then gets delivered after a couple of weeks. So what do you think the animal's doing? It's hanging there, and remember, taurine is in free form. This is why I always say use free form. Do not use anything bound to it, because it's not as effective. The free form is exactly the same, like in the fluids of the animal. So as the fluids start being lost from the animal and end up at the base of at the floor of the actual fridge, the refrigerator, it's not like really cold, because they don't want to freeze the meat. They just keep it cooled down, so the fluids can still run. And so these fluids, with them goes the taurine, and the taurine can vary quite a bit, from 50 milligrams to 100 milligrams. So you could actually lose anything between 4 to 8 times. That's a lot. Now with fish, it's less of a problem, because of the skin and all that. It's usually, and even a lot of the fish that's wild caught, and even if they cut it up and all that, they snap freeze it, and it just doesn't have enough time to lose any of the fluids. So it tends, and also generally speaking, the cells of the fish are much higher because they need it. Because it regulates, it's an osmolyte. Its original purpose was an osmolyte. It's an ancient molecule going all the way back to early life in the oceans. And it uses basically, taurine is used inside the cells to regulate the pressure of fluids inside the body. So it's very important in regulating the homeostasis of fluids and electrolytes. And so by regulating the fluids, it can actually reduce the amount of pressure. Now, as a consequence, the fish that's actually going through is going to sustain slightly less oxidative stress. Now, it does help, but that's another reason. Its main antioxidant is astaxanthin, around that red stuff around the middle of the spine that the fish usually have. Well, that has massive electron doning, and it's a big sort of antioxidant, way bigger than vitamin C and vitamin E and all that are just down here and nothing in comparison to. But the fish undergo a lot of oxidative stress, and at the mitochondria level is where the taurine inside the cell is operating, and at the outside, the exterior of the cell is where astaxanthin is operating in terms of reducing oxidative stress. This is why they need the astaxanthin outside, and inside the cell they need shitloads of taurine. It's no different than bodybuilders when they exercise certain muscles, that a lot of taurine goes into those muscles because of the higher oxidative stress. Same thing with the fish. And the fish, because they're under a lot of pressure in the water and they're moving, they have to use a lot of, they're actually on constant, just think of it, they're constantly damaging their protein, their cell structures under this constant pressure of moving through the water. So they're under much higher pressure than we are at atmospheric levels. So these are the differences, and that's why they have high taurine levels. Oysters, for instance, just 100 grams of oysters has 2.2 grams of taurine in it. And most other fish have very high levels. It sort of explains the immunoprotection that the Japanese got with COVID, and why there was the Japanese paradox. It wasn't a paradox, it was taurine from the high fish consumption that they've got in Japan, and to some extent in Korea as well. And that's why we saw less of these problems and, less elderly dying. And I was saying, why aren't more elderly dying in Japan? Well, I was around COVID people continuously, had vitamin D, and my taurine. I couldn't catch it, even though I had people with active COVID around me. I couldn't, do the test, negative. And the only time is when I wanted to do a video on, remember the vitamin D video? Some of my old subscribers will remember that. It was specifically to do that video that I had to get to a baseline and then do the test and then do the next test once I took to bring up my levels again and all that. Yes, unfortunately, Dad actually ended up getting COVID just as I, part of the way into the, towards the end of that month, that I'd actually, just bad timing. But it didn't really affect me that bad. But that's the only time I actually registered positive. Otherwise, I was around people that were constantly getting it. I had one lady that I actually walked with, and she got it about 3 or 4 times. I never got it. And she's the partner of my brother, so, or my best friend who's like a brother. So his partner, but he was also doing vitamin D and taurine levels like me and not getting anything. He was sleeping with her, nothing. Kissing her, nothing. So, call it a paradox. I don't know. I don't call it a paradox. I just call it, getting animal foods into you. So that what we're trying to do is, I'm trying to spare methionine for methylation. I have to as well, because I do have the MTHFR thing. Now, obviously, the MTHFR side of things, riboflavin is what corrects that, and that's primarily in animal foods as well. Meat and dairy have high riboflavin, so that corrects that part, the enzyme, the way it functions. But at the same time, even if that enzyme is working, I want to spare folate, I want to spare B12 for other purposes in the body. And I also want to spare methionine for methylation purposes. And so, but methionine goes to cysteine, and cysteine goes to taurine. And so what I'm doing is I'm sparing it. And our ancestors wouldn't have had to spare it because they got enough methionine and they got enough taurine in the diet because their food supply was fresh. That's the difference between our modern food supply and, yes, so they would have got far more in their diet. It would vary between 3+ grams per day based on how much they ate. It would vary between days. Sometimes it could be down to 2 grams, but they definitely weren't getting the low levels that we're getting now. Most people are probably having like 150 or 170 maybe, which is 6 ounces of meat a day, if they're lucky. And, they're probably, if they're getting 50, they're probably getting about 60 or 70, maybe 100 if they're lucky, milligrams of taurine, which is nothing. It's very low. And that means it's going to tax other pathways. It's going to, reduce the amount of cysteine and methionine you have in your system. And these people are not eating enough rich foods of methionine or cysteine because they're not eating animal foods. They're getting less of these things. So they've even got less to synthesize taurine. So this is the problem to a large extent in that regard. And they can't, because they're not eating enough animal foods, they won't get enough choline because choline betaine goes straight through, converts homocysteine back to methionine, recycles it, which means it spares. So this is the methionine cycle, and choline betaine directly interact in that right at the heart of it, directly into that cycle, and that means it goes straight back and avoids having to go through the folate cycle. So you reduce that requirement. Yes, the body's such an interesting place in that regard. So there's all that sort of stuff. The body's a Swiss Army knife with a lot of things. And so, but if you give it the right nutrition, then all these things work better. Anyway, are there any carnivore-friendly antihistamines? I think I've covered that. I've made a video on that. Go and check it, Raymond. And I've covered it. Taurine plays a big role in terms of histamine, and vitamin D also plays an important role there as well. So if you're getting good enough taurine over time, you've re-regulated your gut microbiome. Obviously, there are other issues as well. Biosalts, if you've got a gallbladder issue, that can also cause some issues, especially if you've got too much biosalts going in, can cause some derangements and some histamine effects or releases. If there's too much because it's not being recycled at the base of the small intestine, that can be a problem as well. So it depends on what your situation is. You may need to consult with somebody like Bart to go through and check and find out exactly what the drivers are. Or you may need to go to a naturopath and do some testing to find out exactly what the situation is. And so looking at some of the inflammatory markers in that regard. But I do cover a lot in my taurine stuff in how to properly regulate the gut microbiome and information. There will be more information coming in future videos that will cover more of these sort of issues about how to re-regulate the gut. I've got more in the pipeline. I just haven't produced them yet. It's time. Having a day job causes some issues on that front. So be patient or consult with Bart K. Anyway, Ram Nicker, how are you, mate? Good to have you here. Anyway, is 3 meals a day bad on a carnivore diet, provided it ate significant bigger protein-rich single meals along with 2 smaller meals? Yeah. Look, it depends on what you combine. I'll give you an example. I will have yogurt in my smaller meal, but I'm getting enough yogurt and I'm having a coffee at about the same time. So with the milk and all that, I just get about 3.3 grams of leucine. I won't get it from just having milk. You'd have to consume about nearly a litre or a pint, like not a pint. What's the American one? I forget. Anyway, is it a gallon? I think a gallon or not. Maybe I'm wrong. Don't quote me. It's about, to get enough for protein synthesis of milk, you have to have like nearly a litre or 0.9 of a litre. And I'll just do it in pounds. That'll be easier. These North Americans and their non-metric stuff, or some other people that are non-metric, because they will listen to this. Most of us are metrically aligned. So 333 is 31.76 ounces, nearly 32 ounces. Not that I'm recommending having that amount of milk anyway. Where with about 300 grams, so you would have to have that amount, which is like 2 pounds of milk, in a sense. Where for 300 grams of full fat yogurt, like Greek style yogurt, about 300 would have enough leucine, about I think it's about 2.7 at 300 grams. Divide that by 28.8, which is about 10.6, let's say 11 ounces of basically yogurt. And I tend to have that amount because I need the extra calcium, because I've got those genetics. I don't get enough calcium, so I need to have more calcium-rich foods to get enough calcium, because I can't extract enough from meat because of my genetics. I'm one of those 24%. I've done a video covering why blood sugar goes up in some people, and it's got in brackets calcium. It's a calcium issue due to the genetics, that 24%. Yeah, so that's the issue why some people on a carnivore diet also get higher blood sugar. It's because of low serum calcium levels. And so I have to consume a bit more in terms of calcium, and that's how I get it. Plus I get about enough for protein synthesis, together with a glass of coffee, which half of it is nearly milk. I get enough milk. Combine that too, it gets up to about slightly above, close to 3. If I throw a bit of beef jerky or biltong, I used to have one of those satchels, which is about all up is about 20 grams of protein in it, and I'll have one of those combined with the other. I'm getting more than enough protein to get that leucine protein synthesis effect. So I'll do that. That's at around 11 o'clock, which is my cortisol is at the lowest. So I'll do that. And then in the afternoon, about 3 o'clock, afternoon tea, I usually will walk up the stairs, because I walk all the way up to the 9th floor. Then I'll walk down, and then I go and I'll warm up, some steaks and stuff like that I've brought from home. I've cooked them. I'll warm them up, and then I'll have those. Sometimes it's sausages. Sometimes it depends, Sometimes it can be fish, tuna and stuff like that, and I'll just warm it up. I'll have that. So it can vary, and I usually will use, if I'm having that, I usually have brie or some butter, and I'll put it on and let it melt on top. So I keep a number of things in, like at work, I have my yogurt, I have some butter, I have some cheese, I have other things, and it's just in a plastic bag, and it's just in there. So, and I can access that through the working, and I have the same sort of stuff at home, so interplays in that regard. And so that's how I operate. So the 2 days that I work from home are the days, like the Monday and the Wednesday are the ones that I cook at home, or on the weekends I cook at home, obviously. But on the other days at work, 3 days that I'm there, I usually have all that stuff. I don't take the meat in. I take that every day from my fridge at home. So depending on how much I want to eat that day, if it's a training day, I'll take a bit more. And so I have it ready to go in sealable bags, and I'll just take it and I'll just take it out of this and I'll dispose of the bag, and I'll just, that's how I do it primarily. I have now got myself to get rid of away from plastic bags altogether. I've now got little containers that I've bought, and I'll start using those, and I'll just take it in that way, because that's how I've got like big glass containers, and that's how I store it in the fridge. But probably a good idea is to store it in smaller containers and then take them directly to work in that regard, rather than putting them in plastic freezer bags, and which are better because they have less problems in any xenoestrogens going in, but probably a good idea to get away from all that altogether. Even though it's for a very short amount of time, still probably not a good idea. We just too much. We're surrounded with too much plastic, which is a problem. So I'm trying to minimize that by getting smaller glass containers. I've started using them just recently, very recently. So that's what I'm doing at the moment. That's how I sort of operate. So it's 2 meals, 11, and then at 3 o'clock in afternoon tea. So while others people are having coffee, I don't. Luckily, I've got some of the genetics that can clear caffeine very fast, 4 times faster. So where other people can take anywhere between 4 to 6 hours, for me, within 1.5 to 2 hours, usually about 1.5 hours, it's completely out of my system. I can have late in the evening, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock sometimes, have coffee and then go straight to bed right after. It doesn't seem to affect me at all. And I'm out within 5 minutes. So it's not an issue. Again, genetics, being from a Greek background and being exposed over multiple generations to coffee consumption, obviously, caffeine is a toxin. The body has upregulated pathways to detoxify. These are called detoxification pathways. They're also considered longevity pathways. So, my distant ancestors would have suffered far more than I did, and I'm the beneficiary of their suffering, in a sense. Yes. The other one is the salicylate thing that we're not sensitive to. Are watermelons or other melons good sources of carbs? No. Simple as that. Look, anything that's fruit, anything that's got fructose in it, avoid it like the plague. Simple as that. I can't stress that enough. Honey, fruit, all these things are the worst carbohydrates you can consume, period. There is 2 reasons why you don't want to consume any fruit or any honey. One reason, now topical, that's fine. If you want to use topical, that's fine. But consuming it, putting it down your throat, not a good idea. One, the glycation effect is 7. For somebody being on like us on a carnivore diet, we've got less issues. We've got better intracellular antioxidant production and stuff like that because of the nutrition, but we will still have like 7 times glycation from baseline. But if somebody's on a SAD diet, obviously their glycation, because of the Randall cycle, because these things are staying in the bloodstream for longer, they can have up to 10 times more glycation of their protein structures. Not a good thing. Keep the fructose out, let alone the fructose goes through the same pathway as alcohol, gets converted up. You'll get a whole lot of triglycerides that come out of that, like alcohol produces a whole lot of triglycerides, and you'll get far more inflammation in the liver. So definitely not a good idea, So bad idea. Any fruit. And remember, these things were seasonal in the past. watermelons, melons. They're all seasonal things. At the end of summer and the early part of the fall is when they were available for a couple of weeks, and then that was it. We didn't have them all year round. Just because we've got refrigeration and we can store them all year round, they're not meant to. The fructose is meant to be used to fatten up. Simple as that. So we want to keep away from fructose as much as possible. So bad carb. So on that front, that issue. On the other point, when it comes, is they tend to be also fruit and honey tend to be higher in deuterium. Deuterium is a stable isotope of hydrogen. Unlike H1 hydrogen, that hydrogen has one proton in its nucleus. Deuterium has a proton and a neutron. The neutron is the problem. It slows down the ATPase, the nanomotor in the mitochondria that produces ATP. It slows it down. Too much of it will bust those motors. You lose too many of those motors, you'll revert your cell into highly senescent cell and potentially cancerous in the long run, because you'll actually start using fermentation because you can't produce enough ATP. So that's a cell that is in deranged and in a bad state in the long run from high deuterium. So these foods are very high in deuterium. Obviously, they're not as high as things like seed oils, which are incredibly high. They're just a disaster for the mitochondria in terms of deuterium. But it's not a good idea to be putting high deuterium foods in our diet. Simple as that. Not good for our mitochondria. And over the long run, you definitely need some deuterium. So, you don't want to go below 100 and you don't want to go above 130. Animal fats are smack in the middle. The grass-fed, 115. The non-grass-fed, the grain-fed, are about 120 odd, but still in the safe zone. The extra deuterium is used within collagen structures to give them rigidity and stiffness. And there's excessive amounts of deuterium in the bones, which is good. It gives them rigidity. The collagen structures. Remember, bone is mineralized collagen, so it gives it rigidity and strength and all that. So there it's fine. The wings of birds, it's fine. They can flap away like mad and all that. But when you have it in the wrong places or in the mitochondria, you're going to be damaging your energy production, and you won't have enough energy to heal yourself, just barely maintain yourself through fermentation, potentially. That's going to be a disaster long term. The other thing is, if you've got excess deuterium in your cells, the cells become stiffer. It's great to stiffen the cells of the wings of a bird, so it's much better to flap away. But not a good thing for our stuff. So when somebody tells me I feel stiff and all that, I go, you got a deuterium problem. You got too much deuterium in your collagen structures. That's why you're stiff. So it's not a good thing to be consuming this sort of garbage. I consider fruit as garbage. It's got very little nutrition, and it's got downsides in terms of fructose for fatness and fatty liver and stuff like that. And the other thing, and glycation, advanced glycation end products, not a good thing. It actually causes problems with folding of proteins and stuff like that. It's another thing altogether in protein structure and the way it functions. So too much glycation in certain parts like amyloids, you're going to have problems. Amyloids are fine. Amyloids aren't the problem. People that believe amyloids are bad amyloid, better amyloid, are morons. They got no idea. That's for a future video for me to explain why amyloids are not bad and why the Alzheimer's thing, they got it all wrong. The whole problem is we don't get enough choline and we don't get enough taurine in the brain to deal with the proper functioning of amyloid, to reduce the glycation factor and to control the protein folding and not the derangement of amyloid. That's the problem. Again, it's like LDL. Oxidized LDL is a problem. LDL that's not oxidized is not a problem. You know, you try and lower your basically you know, your amyloid, you'll end up very dumb and demented. So these people don't know what they're doing. The reductionist morons that are basically deranging people, then dealing with a problem which is high deuterium and high glycation, you know, of protein structures, so they can't fold properly to function properly. So that's the problem, and that's why we do not want this garbage in our diet. You know, fruit is the worst thing you can give yourself or your kids or anyone. Take all the fruit that you've got in you and throw it out. Absolutely throw it out, you know. And if you've got honey, give it to your worst enemy, you know. Don't do that, because I'm an Orthodox Christian. We shouldn't be doing that. Just throw it in the bin. Not good. Or leave it, if it's one of those like Manuka honey and all that, leave it for topical use. You know, deal with bacteria and stuff like that. For topical use, fantastic for those purposes. You know, grazers and stuff like that, fine. But keep away from that sort of that crap. Not a good thing, Martin. Anyway, Oggy, how are you, mate? Why are starches not optimal? Well, for a number of reasons. High deuterium is one thing. The key thing is high deuterium. Long term, it's not a good thing. For your collagen structures, not a good energy source, because it creates far more reactive oxygen species through complex 1 in the mitochondria. So that's a long discussion, but it's not a good thing in that regard. Now, it can be reduced. The oxidative stress of starch can be reduced through taurine supplementation. One, because it reduces lactate, it forces it through to be processed, and at the same time, the damage that it causes, it lowers in the mitochondria when there's enough taurine in the cell. But, we've got other things to use for taurine to repair and heal and do things in the body. Why use it? Just to basically poison ourselves. So it isn't optimal. It was seasonal that we used. If we take a look historically, we primarily consumed animal foods. The only starches that we consumed were grains. They were fermented. We ate a very small amount per day, and we were very physically active, and we were just repleting, in many cases, glycogen stores. People underate. It was only the rich that used to get sick, the kings and all that, used to get very sick, and they had their physicians for that reason, because they tend to be diabetics and all that, and we've got records of that. They used to test their urine for the sweetness. That means to see how much, and that was a sign of, pissing out sugar. That's how they worked out that people had diabetes. And that was before even fructose existed, because fructose didn't exist until, and it was only brought into Europe after Alexander the Great in the Hellenistic period, because it was first invented in pretty much, and some of it got into the Middle East and those areas, but it was extremely rare to be used. And it was only when people went to the Americas and brought the sugar cane back, that's when really it took off in Europe. So yeah, before that, that's the sugar part, which is the fructose part and all that sort of stuff. But even starch, it was, you had some tubers, you had that, but it was mostly seasonal, and a lot of it, for the other periods of time, because you couldn't store it a lot, it would, they had to basically either ferment it, and it would reduce the anti-nutrients, it would reduce some of the sugar content, and they were just repleting glycogen because they were very physically active. It's only the rich that were suffering. So, but they were also, because they weren't getting enough protein, they tend to be shorter compared to their lords and masters. So you have to see, when you're looking at history, you have to see it through the prism of these things. So you have to understand the whole nature of what were the people. Look at their images. How were they depicted? The peasants were shorter. These were, and we can see it actually even in tribal groups that are agrarian tribal groups in Africa that are under eating protein, tend to be shorter and all that. And then you've got just down the track, you've got a whole lot of Maasai that are just 6 foot because they're getting more animal nutrition and living longer than those agrarians. So these are these things. They may not be getting diseases of civilization, but they're not living long years. Why? Because they're damaging their mitochondria, and eventually they get to an area where they have too much senescence and they drop dead much earlier. So it's not optimal from many reasons. So, and I can see you're on a bike there, so maybe you, and that's, you know, a lot of people think that you need carbs for that. No, you don't. Actually, some of the top champions at the moment are people in this space that are doing like long distance running. Like the 100-mile one is a carnivore guy that's actually won the 100-mile one. He does steak and eggs, and he's won the 100-mile in America a number of times now and just blitzed his own record. So it's just nonsense. Gluconeogenesis covers all your glucose requirements. At the end of the day, what you need is energy, and the best energy is fat. And because when you've got fat and you're using fat, you've got more than sufficient fat. And remember, Bart actually explains the 3-gear system in the muscles. So you've got mitochondria, which are producing ATP, and then phosphocreatine that is recycling the phosphate. It comes over here, adenosine diphosphate, gives the phosphate, adds it on to, these are all interlinked. There's no aerobic and anaerobic and all that. That's just nonsense. It's all it's all aerobic. So over here, you're using oxidative phosphorylation in the mitochondria, produce ATP. And then you release that phosphate. That phosphate then attaches and goes all the way back over here to the filaments, the contractile filaments, and there is where it gives ADP, that phosphate, ATP, produces the sort of glucose that is required, you know, from the glycogen stores, and basically then, bang, the contraction. And then it releases that phosphate, and that goes all the way back through that the phosphocreatine. These loops, those 3 gears are interlocked that pass these things back and forward. That's how you have to see it. So fundamentally, these are the sort of recycling, you know, of these compounds to basically have this gear system working to basically be able to produce energy for these contractile effects that are happening in the muscle fiber. So your body can produce all the glucose that it requires to provide it there, or from the glycogen stores or there, to be then utilized by that energy that is produced close to the filaments to provide for that contractile effect. So nope. And so that contractile effect is through this sort of a gear system that exists in the muscles. So that's the most simplistic terminology that I can give you. But Kay gives you a more scientific, with all the scientific. I'm giving you a simplified to make it easy for people to understand. So when you're doing that sort of exercise, you do not need at all. Your body will provide everything through the backbone of glycerol or some of the gluconeogenic amino acids, you know, like alanine, for instance. So your body can produce all that sort of stuff. So it's not a requirement. The requirement for glucose in the body is 0 grams. And it's not only me saying it. Even the United States Department of Agriculture, the USDA, on their official site, because this is physiology. It's in physiology books. Basic physiology will tell you the requirement for glucose is 0 because your body can produce it. Essential nutrients are things that your body can't synthesize. So you can't synthesize essential amino acids. You need to get them from the diet. You can't synthesize essential fatty acids. You need to get them from the diet. And a number of micronutrients that you need to get from the diet. Well, that's how the body works, guys. You know, so that's how we have to see it. And if you're in a glacial period where you've got ice all the way down to the tropics, what plants? All you've got is these big animals. They have to be big with a lot of fat on them to protect them, but also to have really strong ability to tear through the snow to get through to the grasses. So this is how it operates. And they have to stomp through that to break up the ice to be able to, and that sort of melts in the summer slightly, which allows some of the grass to grow. And then these animals can actually consume it all year round. So, I mean, and this is what you see if you see animals in the mountainous areas where there's more snow, they're literally clearing up to be able to access the grass. So that's how they operate. So they still do the same thing today. Why wouldn't they? It's genetically determined through all these generations of ruminants. So nothing's changed there. And we just hate them. And what do you get from them? Well, fat and protein, pretty much. So, yeah, so that's the story as far as that. No, it's completely unnecessary and deleterious long-term from the deuterium side, both for your collagen structures being too stiff and not maintaining the right level of rigidity. And on the other hand, that's why constantly fasting, like if you're in a fasted mimicking diet, constantly like these crackpots in the longevity space tell you low protein, well, then you're not getting enough of the deuterium, then you're going to have problems as well. Your collagen structures are going to have some derangements, but that's another story. Anyway, now, Jonathan, at what body fat? Oh, that was the previous one that you had asked him. He's already explained that. How much of a concern are xenoestrogens from plastics? They can be a problem. And there's a lot of things that actually, we've got mold exposure in homes or office space or stuff like that. That's one thing that can actually increase these, sort of cause derangements to our endocrine system. Then you've got, depending on the plastics, some plastics will gas out certain compounds more than other plastics. So it varies. Some are worse than others. Then the water supply is a problem as well. While they kill off the bacteria, they kill off a lot of the other stuff, there's a lot of compounds that remain in the water. This is a problem. Like for instance, a lot of people don't realize that contraception, that women take contraception pill, that actually ends up in the water, and when it goes back to get recycled and all that, it still remains, and that comes back in the tap water. Well, that's actually affecting testosterone levels in men. That's why I don't recommend consuming tap water. That's why I buy alpine water, which has got slightly lower deuterium. It's also got minerals in it, trace minerals, which is fantastic for the body because our soils are quite depleted. And at the other end, I'm not getting any of the xenoestrogens or the stuff that can actually have a negative effect on my testosterone. So that's the other thing. So that's the problem as well. At some stage, I'm going to make a video on it and cover exactly these issues with contraception and women and interacting with women and kissing, that all that. There's issues there, a lot of that sort of stuff. That's for another day, how it negatively affects and what men can do to mitigate some of this sort of stuff. So that's for another day, another video. There are sort of supplements you can take and do certain things to mitigate some of this and make modifications to your lifestyle. But that's for a future video, which I want to make. If I give too much away now, I won't be able to there'll be no value in making that video. So you will have to wait for that. Anyway, so you're taking liposomal quercetin a day during the summer. Not carny, but it works. I've certainly noticed a difference. Fair enough. So you've been a bad boy in the summer. You should, yes. What about the diet in the middle age? I heard that a previous stream mentioning 2-to-1 animals to plant food ratio. No, you don't need any in the older age, actually people need slightly more protein because they have weaker ability to assimilate, to take up protein. Actually, the Maasai, I've done a video on the Maasai. You should go and see it. What they do is when this older men in Maasai or females get sick, they actually give them more protein. A bone broth with a certain plant compound that's got like it's got like a hermetic effect to get the body to produce more endogenous intracellular antioxidants to reduce oxidative stress in the body. So that's what they use that. But you can use saunas and other things like that. That's another one. Sauna is really good to try and get rid of xenoestrogens. Fantastic. So if you've got a sauna, use it on a regular basis if you're exposed to xenoestrogens. So just keep that also in mind. Now, you will need, and that's why, and plant protein is crap. It poorly absorbed, too many, protease inhibitors, and that means that if you got a protein, you have protease inhibitors, you can't break it down to simple amino acids for them to be absorbed through the gut. We absorb amino acids, not foreign proteins, because unless you got leaky gut, that's when you absorb foreign proteins, and quite a lot of them, and that creates a lot of potentially autoimmune and a whole lot of other issues. So plants are not a good source, and the older you get, you need more protein. And that's the only way of building muscle and bone density. That's how I rebuilt my father from the 70s to his 90s. And then when he had the accident, hit by a car, no broken bones, no fractured bones at 88.5. Yes, extra protein, extra leucine, extra taurine really made over the decade stronger bones. And while he suffered some ligament stretches and all that, I mean, get hit and knocked about nearly 3 meters as an old man, not by 4-wheel drive. Not a pleasant thing to happen. But many in that age bracket would have had multiple breaks, potentially, many broken bones, and would have died from just not being able to heal at that age. So obviously we used a couple of things like taurine, BPC 157, and other things to help him along with the healing for those tendons and and stuff like that, because he was getting a bit lockups and stuff like that, because there's been some inflammation on those the tendons and stuff like that. But eventually things settled down, the oxidative stress settled down. He came back quite well, eating more animal foods. I've because I was looking after him, I was feeding him shitloads of animal foods. And now he's got into the habit of eating more animal foods and not really worrying about it, because he realized it takes too long to actually prepare a lot of the plants. And so he goes, it's just easy for me to go and buy some steaks and eat that with eggs. So he's doing more of that. He's shifted more carnivore than even he was before. Before I was using like leucine supplementation and taurine supplementation to amplify, to get more of the plant proteins into protein synthesis, but using that sort of biohack of putting about 6 grams of leucine with his main meal and taurine at the same time, a couple of grams. So that was a biohack, which I recommend for people that are in nursing homes, their parents, and getting poor diets and giving them some of these supplements to try and help them along to improve their musculoskeletal structures. And mitigate some of the deleterious effects of the poor diets in those damn nursing homes. But that's something that I brought up before. But yeah, if you can avoid these things, it's much better. Okay. Yep. I think I've covered that. Oops. What does Stefan say? What is the influence of the oxygen content in the bedroom of sleep? I'm always wondering if it's better to close the door to keep out the light, or to let in some more fresh air. I tend to keep my window locked, but that wide open in my bedroom, even in winter. I have a thick doona in winter. I'm using a light doona at the moment because it's not that cold. but usually I have my thick doona, and it's actually better. I warm up the room, like I'll heat it up before I go to bed, like half an hour. I'll get the temperature really high up, turn off the heater. I've got that wide open, and then I go to sleep. And I can, and because you're supposed to be able to sleep deeper, the temperature has to drop your body temperature. That's normal. High temperature, you can't sleep properly. Not a good thing. But initially, it's uncomfortable if it's too cold. But I keep the window just slightly open like that, and that basically provides good ventilation. And I've noticed it's really improved my sleep, and I don't have any stuffiness or anything like that like I used to. So I think it's a good idea to get some ventilation and all that, fresh air. I think that's how we lived out in the open, in areas in sort of in a naturalistic environment. So I don't think sealing off. Yes, I understand why people would do it through the daytime, but the levels of a number of gases will build up in a home environment, and other compounds. So ventilation, I think, is important. I always will keep, because I've got a little lock. I'll lock the window, so I keep it just slightly open, and I'll keep most of my windows just slightly open and locked in place. So it's really hard to get. And I'm sort of lucky because I'm not in sort of some remote area where it's more vulnerable. I've got a clinic on the bottom side here, and so it's really hard. It's open throughout the whole day until the afternoon. So it's not, there's too much traffic going in and out. It's hard for somebody to do a dodgy thing. So I don't really worry at all about that. There can be issues, but if you're in the home and you want to have some fresh air coming in at night and it's a safe place, yeah, by all means, I think it's a good idea, personally, for the reasons that I've given. What would be missing out on if we were completely excluding fish and seafood? I think that when I look at the ancestral data, this is the N15, Delta 13, some of the zinc data, and a whole lot of other things. When I look at them, what I find in all populations that are pre-agricultural, that is. Now, even some post-agricultural that are having very little carbohydrate in their diet, they're more, pastoral and stuff like that, they still have some fish, every single one of them. It's either river fish or crustaceans or coastal stuff. And when I look around the settlements, the archaeological settlements, even in East Africa and other parts, it's close to waterways. So we always had some seafood in our diet. Not a lot. The main part was ruminant animals. When I look, I've actually done, even for the ancient Greeks, this is the pre-classical period. We're talking now way back in the archaic period. That's when there was very little plants being cultivated. That was in the period just coming out of the 300 years after the collapse of the Mycenaean civilization, or the Great Bronze Collapse that happened in that period. So we're talking about post 1100 BC. So the 300 years as we just enter what is called the archaic period before the classical period. In that period, some of the research, these people primarily consumed animal foods quite a bit, and some coastal fish, this group in the northern middle part of the Peloponnese. So that was an interesting, and I actually did the carnivorous Greeks. There's if you type in Greeks, Harry Serpanos, you'll get the video, and it actually shows the N15 data and all that. Now, when we look further back, I will, not this year, but next year, I'm planning to do a whole series on N15 data and all that of different populations through one of the academic websites that I'm a member of. They allow you to subscribe for certain subject matters. one of those subject matters is the N15 data. And so I get a lot of stuff. So I've actually accumulated a whole lot of studies, but I'm going to do a series of studies about, and even show as people changed and moved from region to region or changed into agriculture, how these isotopes changed within their collagen structures. So, and to explain how the diet actually changed and what people were doing and stuff like that, and the height of these people and the change in their body composition and stuff like that. So it's really interesting, all that sort of stuff. So, but what we noticed with all pre-agricultural populations, they all consumed a small amount of fish and crustaceans, and they always had most of their settlements along rivers and shorelines. They did not really venture into the interior. That only happened once we had civilization. That's the only time that started happening. In some areas we did, where we followed, if we went into the interior, we were following river systems. But outside the river systems, or the hunting grounds, like like Central Asia, where you've got these big grasslands where you can hunt a lot of animals, that's where people hunted. But there's a whole lot of river systems through those as well. So most of their settlements, they're semi-permanent settlements, or the ones that they used now and then, were primarily along river systems. Even though they hunted on the plains, they still lived close to river systems to be able to access some of these foods. So that's quite clear. That's what the data actually shows. So it's quite clear we consume stuff, and that's why I do recommend that people consume. Now, if you eat meat only, like just a muscle meat, technically speaking, if you're not inflamed, if you have no issue whatsoever, you're probably getting sufficient omega-3. If it's grass-fed, yeah. Now, if you're inflamed, whatever, because inflammation doesn't only come from the diet, it also can come from your environment, mold exposure, chemical exposure, radioactive exposure, whatever it is, stress, family relationships and all that increases oxidative stress and other things inside your body. And then you may need more omega-3s or more arachidonic acid. So that's a different situation. And then your requirements may be insufficient to some extent, potentially. Obviously, because we've done no experiments, long-term experiments, we can't say that for certain. So I always say to people, try and put at least once, if not twice. I usually have seafood twice a week. That's what I do. Other people can do whatever they like. That's their business. And it's usually it's like more of my snack meal. If I'm having, like, I'll have some sardines. So I'll have cooked them, because I usually go down to the waterfront. I don't get the canned ones. The oils, high in deuterium, because of the seed oils in that. Even the olive oils, problematic. If you're going to get any canned stuff, get it with water, spring water, nothing else. Spring water will also be lower because it comes from an alpine regions. It'll be lower in deuterium. So do not use anything else. And you can have some of that, occasionally. I do sometimes buy, spring watered sardines, but mostly I usually buy them from the waterfront because I can. And then I usually have some tuna. So it's usually, I'll have a serving of a week of sardines, and I'll have a serving of tuna or salmon once a week. That's what I usually have. And the rest of it's just ruminant animals, eggs, dairy. Yeah, that's pretty much my diet. It's not very complicated. I do have some treats, and those favorite treats of mine are my little carny, what I call my egg pizza. So what it usually is I'll beat up a couple of eggs, 3 to 4 eggs, depending on how many left. So I'll beat them up, and then I'll put them in a non-stick pan. Now I use the type that I use. I'm getting a glass one. I use a ceramic one, but it's a high quality one. It cost me a lot of money. But I'm thinking about getting a glass one now. But even that is quite safe. The one that because I use plastic utensils, I'm very careful. So I don't use any metal or any stuff like that in that. No. And pretty much I put those in. I let it build a base, and it's half cooked. It's not completely cooked. I've got grated cheese, and I just will put grated cheese on top, and then I'll put all my salami on top. Stick it all. I'll press it in with my fingers. I'll have to wash them after, and so I'll do that. And so that will they'll glue all together. The base will actually get not well done, and not well, just slightly done. So it's got a bit of, it's just starting to get burnt, just starting. You don't want to burn the egg, just starting, like normal omelette. It's just starting to solidify properly, and then I'll grab it and then quickly just flip it over, and then it will actually let it cook for a few minutes on the other side. You don't want to cook it too much, because the problem there is that you may actually get the cheese becoming too soft and then running through, and that can really throw all the pieces of salami can go all over the place. So you've got to be very careful. Sometimes if you pack it really tight and there's no places where it can come out, it usually isn't a problem. That's what I put extra salami because I love salami, and so I'll do that, and then I'll put the plate on top and flip it over. Take it, put the pan down, and it's on the plate, ready to serve. So yes, very nice. I do have to say I did buy some extra salami this week. So on Monday, not tomorrow, but on Monday when I'm working from home, that will be my treat that I'll have. So I'll have some yogurt. I'll have one of those in the morning, and then afternoon I'll have some steaks. So that will be my morning little treat with the yogurt. So yes, looking forward to that. I may even do it maybe on Wednesday as well. Anyway, could occasional inclusion of carbs like honey be beneficial for performance and testosterone? Nah, not really. No real benefit whatsoever. Most of that is reductionist science, and it's usually in animal models, and they react differently. There's a whole lot of, even when it comes to the choline pathways and the taurine pathways within like rodents, it's different. We can only extrapolate that it has a beneficial effect of a pathway, but the amplitude, the signal that actually will happen in the different species is going to be slightly different. So not really applicable. Could BPC 150 help with osteochondritis, osteoarthritis? Potentially. I can't promise anything. What it does is it actually causes angiogenesis. Usually if people have this sort of osteoarthritis, any sort of joint issues and all that, they need to get the injectable type. It's a bit like Cerule. It goes anywhere. You take your stem cells release, they'll go everywhere, and the body will determine where they go. When you're taking oral BPC, it tends to go, it will go the gastrointestinal tract, the whole lot, that will get priority if it needs it, and that will heal really well, which is a good thing. That means your stomach works, because it's actually produced in the stomach. Your stomach will work properly, and so will your gut and your colon and all that. So if you've got colitis and stuff like that, fantastic. To basically, you take it for 2 months, you stop it for 3 months, then you take it for another 2 months, because you don't want too much to upregulate too much angiogenesis, producing new blood vessels in your body, because we don't know, just playing it safe. And then you don't do that until the next year for 12 months after you've done that. 2, not 3, stop for 3, then 2, and then wait for another 12 months before you do it again. So that's the sort of way of taking it. Now, there is injectable types. You can actually inject directly into those areas. That actually shows better results, because it actually concentrates and affects the tissues in that locality. So that people have seen results. And that's what athletes do. And it's been banned now for Olympic athletes so they don't get an unfair advantage. And there's two reasons. One, they don't want an unfair advantage. Two, even though the body produces it, but in lower amounts in the stomach, they don't want to, and that's what, like, if you've got stomach ulcers, fantastic. But getting back to what I was saying, it will basically can help with those sort of issues. I know even with the oral one, my neighbour, her mum in Hong Kong, she basically had these sort of a number of health issues, and she really felt much better once she took that. Gastrointestinal system improved. But once she got towards the in the second month, she noticed that a shoulder that she had actually injured many years ago. She's in her 70s, early 70s, but she had actually injured that like 30 years back. And what she noticed is it went away. So it sorted itself out. So I'm not saying that the oral stuff won't help and all that, but what people have seen when it's like severe arthritic, now she had sort of mild injury there in her shoulder. Now, something which is more severe, it seems that the injectable type, how squeamish are you? I can tell you, I'd probably die if I was a diabetic. I would really struggle to basically inject myself with insulin. Anyway, it's just, sticking a needle in. Ugh. But anyway, my mother could do it just like that. God, bless her soul. All I can say is, Jenna, if you can do it yourself, do it. If you have a friend who does know how to do injections, or your doctor, and they're not going to be a problem, so to speak, or you can con them. I don't know. It's your business. I'm not telling you what you should do. You can get the injectable type, and yes, that would help. So there is an injectable one on Amazon, and there is an oral one on Amazon as well. So if you Google for those, you will find them. There's pretty much those two. So you just have to put BPC 157 and you'll find them. As I said, that's the way you have to take the dosages. The injectable type is much higher, so in that regard. And it seems to deal with severe sports injuries, like quicker recovery. I know still, even though it's illegal, a number of athletes are just ignoring it and basically taking it to recover from severe injuries, to get back into, especially in things like gridiron, rugby, those sort of sports, which is sort of, because people don't know it's very hard to test for it because the body produces it. So if you actually use it, you stay away for a period of time, it'll drop off. So you can recover, and if they test you, they really will only find base level is what the body produces, which is much less. So that's one way of people getting around the banning. I'm not telling you what to do. I'm just telling you what people do. That's all I'm saying. I'm not recommending do this, sports people, illegal stuff. You shouldn't do anything illegal. Otherwise, I'll send Ted around to spank your bottom, bad boys and girls. But if you are inclined that way, this is what some people are doing, some bad people are doing, according to the authorities. So, yes, those lovely authorities, we should always listen to them. Anyway, even though it's not causing them any problems. DJ Projectus, how are you, mate? Lalentian, how are you? My LDLC is 312 milligrams per deciliter. The cardiologist at regular exams refuses to do a test for my calcium score, claiming that there is no point in doing as long as I refuse to take the prescribed statin. What an idiot. Oh, God. Look, you can actually, if you can actually fix this very easily. Now, you're a hyper responder, like Dave Feldman. That's what you are. You're just one of those hyper responders. You've got an ApoE gene of 4-4, which is, or 4-3, something like that. So you tend to hyper respond. I don't get high LDL-C or total cholesterol because I'm a 3-3, and some of my other pathways as well, I tend to not produce a lot. So even when I turn up in hospital with my heart condition, I didn't have high cholesterol at all. And that's why they considered me an anomaly. I'm part of the 5% anomaly. I'm an anomalous human, apparently, according to cardiology. Now I've been discharged by cardiology because I've healed my muscle, so there's no fibrosis in it, and I have normal blood perfusion. That means my blood vessels dilating properly, and blood's moving through them properly without being impeded. Good blood perfusion. That's based on exams that I did a couple of years back in 2019. Luckily, before COVID, before everything went to shit in the world, and it continues on that shitty course. But that's another thing for another day. I've done plenty of videos about about the way things are going. But anyway, getting back to you, what it means is you've got a specific genetic type which predisposes you to higher amounts of LDL-C. It's just that you uptake chylomicron remnants too fast. That's it. And you produce more. But that's also a protective mechanism, because as a tribal person, you would have had the need to deal with pathogens in the environment. So you could actually have a better ability to fight off pathogens, viruses, bacteria, fungi, whatever, far better than other people, even better than me, and better than the 2-2s. But the downside is, when you're actually dealing with modern doctors, is all they can see is in a reductionist way, because they don't understand it's oxidized LDL, ox-LDL, not native, which is unaffected, that caused the problem. Even the Framingham study, which is this long sort of epidemiological observational study of people in that region of America, it's been going on for years and years. They actually showed quite clearly the people with the highest cholesterol in the old age were living longer. So the people with the lowest cholesterol, after 30 years, only 73% were still alive. The people with the high cholesterol, 93% were still alive. There was less mortality in the two groups. So which group would you like to be in, the high cholesterol or the low cholesterol? So it was quite clear. And in the younger ages, it's irrelevant, because you can't extrapolate from a younger age how long somebody's going to live, unless you actually do a proper study, a lock-in study experiment. These are free living people. All we observed is the people that had the higher cholesterol levels after 30 years on a mixed diet. This is on a standard diet, nothing special. They weren't doing a low inflammatory keto or carnivore or low carb diet. They were doing a normal standard diet. The ones with the highest cholesterol were living longer. So which group do you want to be part of? Why aren't people looking at this research? Is I scratch my head and go, what is wrong with you? But obviously, when you're a doctor and you've been brought up with pharmacology and surgical techniques, the surgical techniques are fine if you need for acute care, because if you get blood loss, you die. So stitching you up to prevent blood loss to survive and healing, that's fine. But when it comes to basically pharmacology, short-term use of pharmacology to stabilize a person, fine. Long-term for chronic, diet is much better. And so all this other stuff is just nonsense. Statin is a mitochondrial poison. Now, it does, if you take statin, your calcium score, CAC score will go up, because what statin does is if you've got soft plaque, it will put more. This is where it protects the method it protects. Now, a carnivore diet will also do that through a slightly similar effect, because you're drawing in more calcium, and it will use that calcium to deposit it there. So the difference is that the statin is actually, if you don't eat enough calcium, it will leach it from elsewhere to put it in there, but that's a different story. So, but it's still stabilizing atheromas that are like soft plaque. So it will stabilize them. So it's a good thing as a short-term thing, like 6 months or whatever, to stabilize. Your CAC score will go up. I've actually made a video explaining about this sort of thing. And then you take coenzyme Q10 because it prevents that, and eat more eggs to get more cholesterol, because you can't synthesize enough. So to be able to support yourself while you're stabilizing unstable angina, but you have to have done a test to determine that you've got unstable angina, and unstable angina is the thing that's going to kill you. Calcified plaques, they're stable, they're not going to kill you. It's the soft plaques that are going to kill you. So even there, people have got it completely wrong about the CAC thing, what it tells you. So, and that's why some people go on a carnivore diet, they notice the CAC score goes up. They go, what the hell's happening? I go, you're stabilizing your soft plaque. You're not inflaming it anymore, but you're stabilizing it. You're not creating more of it, which is soft, some of it calcified, some of it not. I worry more when people have not zero, but something like Sean Baker has zero, but he's lived a different lifestyle, cleaner to some extent most of his life, and he hasn't eaten junk food. He's eaten more at home, or and it's been less inflammatory in that regard now that he's shifted, and he's been consuming for many years now a lot of carnivore high foods and all that, like Anthony as well. As a doctor, he's has for many years was consuming far more animal products and all that, so he tended to be slightly healthier than the general population that's eating a lot of junk food and all that. So that's where, and they're inflaming themselves and creating more of this oxidative stress inside their body. So we have to be very careful how we interpret these things, because we can get a lot of things wrong in our understanding, and at what stage of progression of stabilization of plaque or the atheroma is actually happening. And so we need to have all this understanding. It's nuanced. It's not just, I've got a CAC score that's very high. It could be very stable angina, and eventually, if you're in a low inflammatory state on a diet low inflammatory, eventually the body will start clearing that out, and your numbers will come down to zero eventually after a decade, because it takes cellular turnover about a decade. So you need to keep that in mind. It doesn't happen immediately. So you get stabilization, then cleanup, and that's takes a number of years. So don't expect miracles. The body doesn't work miraculously in 1 or 2 days or a small amount of time. So, but you have to understand the processes of healing, stabilization, and then clearing up. That's how the body works in that regard. So, and there is a lot of proper nutrition to deal with that. Now, coming back to your issue with your cardiologist, because you want to find out exactly in what state you are and stuff like that. But you have to, as I said, be very careful about that. You can do the cholesterol code if you, sorry, if you Google cholesterol code, you will find a method that he uses where you eat a lot of high saturated food for 3 days, and then you go and I can't remember the amount of hours before you do a blood test. And what happens is, because you're eating so much, you're eating excess amount of energy. You're taking in sufficient enough energy that you've got more chylomicrons circulating through the system. And what happens is the body has takes up that energy, all that energy, that excess energy over that 3 period of days. It says, I don't need to export any VLDL out of the liver because I've got so much bucket loads of energy coming in. I'm so full of energy. The only thing I can do is once I've given all my cells enough energy, then the rest goes to the fat cells, and very little as chylomicron remnants go to the actual liver to be reprocessed into VLDL to export, and VLDL goes to IDL, then LDLC. So if you've got a lot of chylomicrons going into the liver, then you'll get a lot of export of VLDL, and as a consequence, you'll end up with more LDLC in the end. And that's what they measure. They don't measure the amount of cholesterol or triglycerides in the chylomicrons, because the chylomicrons, once they leave the enteric system and circulate around the body, they're only in circulation about 10 minutes if you're healthy. And then they will shrink down to a remnant. Some of it will go to the adipose tissue, the fat cells, to offload, and the small amount that may be in circulation then will go to the liver. If you've got boatloads, the liver won't uptake. We'll get a signal and say, we don't need to uptake to recirculate, because remember, once the chylomicrons have finished their job, then you have to recirculate the remainder. So if you're getting, you're eating normal meals twice a day or whatever, or you're getting some stuff from the fat cells, and then if it's coming to the liver and then getting re-exported out as VLDL, well, you're going to end up with, this is why when you're fasting, your LDL goes up. You fast and you'll see your LDL will go up. Fast for 3 days and go and it'll be skyrocketed, because you're taking a lot of fats from the fat cells and then you're processing and pushing them out, shitloads. But if you've got a lot of chylomicrons in circulation, your VLDL and LDLC will drop, and the IDL. That's what happens, and that's how you trick the cardiologist to think, oh, he's lowered his cholesterol. I wonder what he did. You had excess energy, so the body did not need to export as much out of the liver, and your LDLC and total cholesterol will drop. The stuff that they measure, because they don't measure, it's like I'm measuring the green cars, which is the VLDL, all the stuff coming out, the green cars coming out of the liver, but I'm not measuring the blue cars that have come from the enteric system, the gut, and circulating. Because we don't measure chylomicron. Well, some tests will measure chylomicron remnants, but they can't measure chylomicrons, but chylomicron remnants they can measure. And even there, they think some low carb people think it's like a bad thing if you've got too many. Again, they don't understand that if this is where people who have got ApoE 2.2, that means there's not enough receptor sites on the liver to take up the chylomicrons, so they're in circulation for longer. And it's a protective mechanism that we develop when we're eating in one of the interglacial periods, we're eating a bit more carbohydrate. So that was a change in those genetics. So you wouldn't so while you're processing the sugar in the liver, you don't want to be taking in fats at the same time, because then you engage the Randall cycle in the liver. You create inflammation in the liver. So that mechanism existed for that purpose, for these people that for whatever reason they consume slightly higher. Maybe they were in a region where there was not enough animal, in the interglacial period, and they were forced to eat a bit more, and this genetic thing happened, because the majority of people for most of history were ApoE44, and we had these shifts. And it seems that the ApoE can shift quite a bit depending on what people eat. So that's why the dominant now one is ApoE33 in the population, again, because of grain agriculture. And if you go to Asia, the dominant one that's becoming now is the ApoE22, which leaves the chylomicrons sitting outside, and they will basically, as a consequence of that, they will utilize sugar much better, and they'll produce more triglycerides, but they'll produce less LDL. So that's the difference in that phenotype. And so for them, it'll look like quite low. So these are the sort of things in that regard. It's the same thing like if you, with your genetics, if you were basically, let's say you had a bad cold and you were sick, your LDL-C would drop dramatically because it's being used by the immune system, and you'll heal quicker than other people. But if you were to then go and give a blood test, your LDL-C would be quite low. Your cardiologist would say, "Oh, fantastic." But it's like the Tasmania, these population that live in the Amazon or close to the Amazon. Some of them got into agriculture now, but a lot of their kinsmen actually live in the Amazon and hunt still. They tend to be exposed to a lot of pathogens. And even though they're eating quite a bit of animal foods and they have the ApoE44, which means that they should have, like you, very high LDL-C, they don't, because they've got so many in their environment, which is a very humid environment. There's a lot of pathogens. They have a lot of lakes and rivers, like in Bolivia, where there's all these lakes and stuff like that. There's a lot of pathogens in those sort of environments. As a consequence, they have this higher amount of LDL going into helping the immune system fight off these pathogens. As a consequence, the scientists are scratching their head and going, "Why are these people they're eating so many animals and they got so low LDL-C?" And people are just not using their brains for some reason to understand that it's the immune system that's taking up the LDL-C. Bloody hell, But anyway, that's the problem when some people, especially archaeologists that don't understand physiology very well and are writing these things they shouldn't be, So that's the problem there as well. But this is probably going to be the last, because it's about getting to 10 o'clock. I'm going to, whoever, as I said to people, when you come in, put your questions in earlier, because eventually I don't have enough time, because I like to thoroughly cover subject matters properly, as if I'm nearly doing like you could say, it ends up being a bit like a deep explanation for you people to understand. So do check the cholesterol code by Dave Feldman and do that protocol, and you'll lower your LDL-C, and your cardiologist will be happy with you and then allow you to do the test. So that's the only thing I can recommend. Even if you take the statin, you will not lower your LDL-C much, because the statin doesn't really help for people that are hyper responders. You'd have to take very high doses, and if you did that, it's very bad for your health long term. That's my personal opinion. What you do with your body is your business, but I can tell you, after 1 year, I got rid of the statin once I started realizing that it's a mitochondrial poison and all the negative effects that it has. As I said, if I was going to use it, I would only use it for a very short amount of time, like 6 months, for the purposes of stabilizing potential, unstable angina. That's the only reason I would use it, because it does rapidly calcify the arteries. That's what it does. That's another problem in itself when people don't have issues, and it creates a lot of stiffness in the arteries for no good reason. So not a good thing. Anyway, DJ Projectus 27, but only 18 likes. We have vegans amongst us. Unlikely. You have to be a subscriber to be able to. So who knows? There may be some vagoons that have subscribed. I'm critical of the plant-based field and what they're promoting, which is wrong information. But other humans, as an Orthodox Christian, I love all humans. I'm not against anyone. I'm not a pacifist either. I will defend myself. But at the same time, I'm not hostile, and I will help somebody that comes to me. So I've had vegetarians that have come to me and asked me questions, and I've given them advice. And I've even given them advice how they can do a more animal-based vegetarian diet with seafood and more dairy and eggs and stuff like that, and some things that they can take in action, and certain crustaceans they can utilize and all that. So I'm not against, I want to help even these people to try and, because I know they're struggling with their consciousness. They're not there yet, but if I can shift them slightly to where they can use some quality nutrition to reduce some of the damaging effects of their body until they wake up to the madness of the veganerized lifestyle, I'd rather help them as a human to a human. So, if some of them want to subscribe, I do know that I do have some vegetarians at least that do subscribe to me, and I think they still subscribe. I've seen a couple of them occasionally come on the live streams. Some of them have disappeared completely. But, I'm not hostile. But it's sometimes just people forget, or just laziness, or, neglecting things. But yes, please hit the like button. It does help the algorithm. It does help me in the long run. I am giving you quality information, and it's sort of a very little effort from your side. Question: what nutrition can help after someone had a stroke? I can tell you one thing: carnivore diet will definitely, but I would be mega dosing, very high dosing. This is my personal opinion. But remember the red blood perfusion about strokes and heart attacks? It's that kills you. And I've actually covered that in some of the videos that I've done on taurine about red blood perfusion. And pretty much the thing that protects you is taurine, that lowers oxidative stress and protects the cells from being further damaged. And the derangements in protein structures, that means it forces the proper folding of proteins, and reduces, because it does inhibit sort of entropy or disorder or breakdown in the protein structures in the body. So that's a sort of a quantum biological effect that taurine has through the manipulation of water molecules in the actual body. It's complex biophysics, but I'm just giving you a general simplified explanation. So yeah, it has massive ramifications. Personally, if I had a stroke, I'd be on 20 grams of taurine personally, for at least 6 months. And then I would drop down to about 12. That's what I would personally do. Yep. Okay, what are the health benefits of squid consumption? What if I eat a kilogram in one meal? Go right ahead. Fine, not an issue. It's a very good source of cholesterol. It's a very good source of a lot of micronutrients. Got good levels of taurine as well. Like all seafood have taurine because it protects them from oxidative stress from the pressure of the water. So they need extra. So all seafood. Yep. I do. I haven't seen many contributions from you recently. She's my next door neighbor. How are you? Hello, kitty. Okay, from Necro. I'd live off pork if the US didn't feed pigs broken Skittles, crackers, Oreo cookies, and not fish out of all the plastics from the ground feed. Eating that pork makes me inflamed, all joints hurt. Okay. Is that how bad it is? Friggin' hell. I'm lucky that I can get foraging pork in Australia. So I get well, the local company, there's a German company, they actually provide all the AGI stores down here, but they get all their pork from down Cygnet area in the south of my estate, and it's all foraging. So these are, just they forage around eating whatever. They give them scraps, like agricultural scraps as well, but they're not eating this sort of crap or whatever. Yeah, look, the food supply in America is horrific. Yeah, look, for chickens and pork in America, especially pork, because they're monogastric, the sort of stuff that they feed them, yeah, it is problematic. There's a lot of seed oils and all that, and they tend to have higher deuterium compared to the, some parts of America, they do have better pork production practices, but some of the industrial type pork production is quite bad. It's unfortunate. You've got to shop around America to try and get quality food. It's the food there's not enough. And this is why I say to people, you've got to support the local farmers, So if they can become more independent from the big food companies, you're going to get better quality product. So, yeah, where these are less problems, and even grains. Where a lot of the actual silage, like even for our animals, once they get them off the grass, because even ruminants, they're grass fed, and then they move them into feedlots. But even here, the feedlots, the grains are usually the stalks, the leftovers, because there are no food subsidies in Australia. So grains are expensive. So they don't feed them grains. What they feed them is silage. That means the leftovers. So once they take the grain, all the stalks and all that, they cut them all up, the stalks from the plants, once they've taken the grain, and they cut them all up, and they mix in like hay, and they'll mix in a number of other like alfalfa, which is a plant that they grow. It's like, just think of it something like a 4-leaf clover. It's something similar to that alfalfa. It's just a small little thing. They grow that, and they'll actually collect it all up, and so they will stick all that into a feed for the animals. So it's less problematic. So even the feed that they create in Australia is less problematic in that regard. So even those animals that are being fed like that will actually have a good profile. I mean, I've actually seen profiles where even the porks that are fed this sort of stuff actually have a better omega-3 than some of the foraging porks. I've actually done a video on that. So it can vary from industry practices in different countries. Australia, New Zealand tend to have better. Some of the Europeans also tend to be a bit better. Canada, the US tend to be horrific in many regards. South America tends to be better as well. So and even Africa tends to be better. It's really, the problem is really the US, Canada, the practices there, and it's probably even worse in the US compared to Canada to some extent. It's really the subsidies. The high subsidies allow them to be able to produce a lot of this stuff really cheap. And also the sort of the food regulation is piss poor in the US. Let's be honest. They've got regulation on us, severe regulation, but they've got, when it comes to the food industry, pharmaceutical industry, the regulations are basically zilch. The people that should be regulated because of their poor practices and the things that they do. But yeah, that's the problem. Can't help you there. If you're able to access overseas pork, try it. I don't know what the prices are like in the US now with all the food inflation and the situation. I mean, yeah, it's unfortunate. For me, it would be quite annoying because I'm not a really beef. I don't mind having some beef and all that. I'll, like tomorrow evening, afternoon, we'll be having some tomahawk steaks. I don't mind, it's that thick. We'll be having those barbecued. That's why I'm doing tonight because I'll be elsewhere tomorrow. But at the same time, I'm not a sort of a regular person that eats beef every day or stuff like that. I know other carnivores do. That's fine. I've got no problems with that. I've always been a pork and lamb. I just love the flavour of lamb. I know some people don't. I do. I find that beef is too bland for me. I don't enjoy the flavour. It's just too bland. I don't mind, like, I'll have patties which I've put in salt, pepper, and a bit of oregano, however you want to call it. And that gives me the flavour that I like. I'll have it like that, but just beef on its own, it's never been a strong thing for me in that regard. I don't mind beef tartare with egg. That's fine. Raw, or sometimes I even get like the sort of eye fillet type, which is really soft and really that, and I'll just raw, and I'll just cut it really thin in that regard, and I'll just lay it out on a tray. I'll season it, allow it to absorb the salt and all that, and I'll just eat it like that as a snack. Really enjoyable. So, yeah, but as I said, piggy, and lamb is my favourites, so it's just what it is. Yeah, it's unfortunate for you that you can't get access. It's, yeah, very unfortunate. It pretty much is. It pretty much is. They don't really do well on grains. They just, yeah, they pretty much avoid it. You really have to put a gun to their head to eat it. Yes, I love pork belly as well. Actually, I had some pork belly today, some thick pork belly like that. So I enjoyed that. That was really nice. Nice, yeah, crackle on top. I've actually got a big slab of pork, of basically pork belly in my fridge. I'm thinking about on my flex day on Tuesday. I do have an interview then. Somebody's interviewing me, and at the same time, I'm actually thinking of basically that will be my so I'll be definitely pigging out on Tuesday on that. So that will be my midday, and then in the evening I'm going around to the old man's to have a meal and a bit of just to see how he's doing. So yes, sad pigs, exactly. Very, very damn annoying. Is it a bad idea to take only delta and gamma of the vitamin E complex? I prefer people take the complex if they're going to take any, like the jarrow, the toko, that comes from palm oil, and it's a complex. It has all the different all the tocotrienols. It has all the different parts of the vitamin E complex, and that's what I prefer, and it's properly balanced as required. So that's the thing, and it's usually for stored PUFA, you usually take it for about 5 to 7 years if you've got a lot of stored PUFA in your fat cells from seed oil consumption in the past. It's to basically provide the electrons to stabilize that as it's coming out and protect from oxidative stress the other cells. So that's one thing. And the other thing is that I do recommend, if people have a lot of exposure as these coming out, these fats as you're losing weight, they're also higher in deuterium because their source was a high deuterium. Now, there are two ways of dealing with it. You can say, I'm going to protect I've done a video on it. I'm going to protect my mitochondria so I don't end up with cancer. And I'm going to basically, for the next 7 years, I'm just going to continue eating more fat, remaining weight stable, not focusing on weight loss, but focusing on diluting inside my fat cells the amount of deuterium fats, so to change the composition to lower the deuterium threshold in the fat cells. So when I do lose weight after 7 years, I'm going to have less damaging effects on my mitochondria, and then I'll be taking also, as I'm losing weight, more taurine to protect my mitochondria and some deuterium depleted water, or eating fats that are very low in deuterium, like your bacon and stuff like that. Especially if it's foraged, it will be much lower than any other. It's down to 113, but it has to be, foraged, not the stuff in America. That's a problem. So just keep that in mind about that. So any other quick question? Okay, called question B. Helping me tolerate dairy again. Hard to say. I've never come across something like that. I feel, Harry, that my body needed the calcium. Yeah, look, if you've got my genetics, you probably do. I had a feeling that long-term magnesium glycinate supplementation put my calcium out of whack. It would. That's why I do not recommend people supplement magnesium or potassium or that. I've actually done videos explaining that you can get more than enough. You excrete around 120 milligrams per day of magnesium, and what is it, 92? I can't remember now, of potassium. You don't excrete a lot. You will take in more potassium and more magnesium if you're eating sufficient animal foods. So, and then if you're getting enough taurine, what will happen is the taurine will regulate the fluids and the electrolytes. It will make sure that you've got sufficient magnesium and potassium inside the cell. It actually keeps it there. So a diet that is more animal-based, not the low-carb, low-protein, keto diets, no, they don't hold on to electrolytes because they're insufficient in methionine to produce taurine, or insufficient in taurine itself because you're not eating enough animal food. And that's why they have the keto flu, which is basically an electrolyte problem because they can't regulate their electrolytes. You don't need electrolytes. You need to regulate the damn things with sufficient taurine, whether you're synthesizing it from methionine or you're getting it exogenously from the diet, or supplementation. And the taurine is the thing that will regulate all the electrolytes. It actually acts as a calcium channel blocker. That's another. That's why I talk about the taurine problem with blood pressure meds. You've got to get off them in order to give the responsibility for regulating blood pressure to taurine, not the meds. So that's a video you can check in the taurine playlist. So yeah, so pretty much we need taurine to regulate all the ions, ion homeostasis. Yep, that will be sorted out by taurine as well. So a lot of these different ions that either are being stored or utilized or whatever. I mean, I think I covered about the iron deficiency and the iron homeostasis that taurine does. They use it in Gaza Strip for the girls in the schools to sort that out. I've discussed it before. I've made a video of it. I believe it's in that playlist. So that's what we need, animal foods to regulate. That's why carnivore diet is much better than a keto diet in terms of regulating the body properly by giving the right nutrients. Obviously, because the issue, this is another reason why having 2 days with some seafood is going to help get that additional taurine if people don't want to supplement, to basically provide that good regulation of electrolytes both inside the cell, keeping more magnesium and potassium inside the cell, and in the bloodstream, keeping more serum calcium and also sodium. And that actually then provides better functioning of the heart muscle. So a lot of people, I've seen them many times having taken too much magnesium and then caused themselves a lower serum calcium and then having heart palpitations and saying, I've got heart palpitations on a carnivore diet. I go, are you taking magnesium supplements? They go, oh, how did you figure that out? Just a wild guess. Yes, I just had a wild guess. No. So, yeah, that's part of the problem. I get a good comment. Oh, thank you. Thank you, Billy, the kid. Yes, this 57-year-old degenerate, whatever, looks great, aging backwards. Look, a lot of my friends have actually said the same thing. I even got the comment today. I said to one lady, because she asked me, and I said, 57, I'm in September. And she goes, what the hell? You don't look anything like that. You look like you're in your early 40s. And I go, oh, thank you. So that was really nice of her to say that. Yes. So I do appreciate it. Okay. Scotty's in the house as well. G'day, Scotty. How are you, mate? Oh, and that was the vegan gut microbiome myth. Thank you, Scotty, for putting that in the chat for people to check out. And that's pretty much it, guys. I'm going to pull the plug, and so just remember, next time you got to get your questions in early enough in that regard. G'day, meat. And hello. And hello, Leo, as well. Anyway, and that's pretty much it, guys. I'm pulling the plug. It's 10 o'clock here. So there will be, for those who are night owls or those who are still up or those who can bother turning up, there will be a live stream tomorrow morning, which is, what do we got? From now, about 12 and a half hours from now, there'll be the regular live stream in that regard. There'll be no Eurasia because I'll be, let's say, somewhere having a barbecue, being involved in a barbecue, eating a tomahawk, that thick tomahawk, and some other meats as well. I am supplying most of the lamb because so yes. So that's pretty much it, guys. Thanks for being here. I do appreciate it. Please hit the like button on your way out if you haven't. So at least there'll be, the algorithm will help out. We need to, encourage the algor to do its nice things. My dear Google friend AI. God, the things we have to do, suck up to an AI. Ridiculous. Anyway, thanks, everyone. Take care. Appreciate it for all of you for turning up and supporting this live stream, because without you guys and the questions and all that, there is no stream. So I do appreciate your support for this channel and for turning up to ask all sorts of questions, which I hope I've given sufficient explanation, and hopefully those who will watch this later on will get some insights into physiology and biochemistry of the human body, and things will get slightly demystified for them. So, as I said, give me any sort of question you like, because it makes it interesting. And I do enjoy sometimes the live streams when they have a lot of varied questions, because it really means that I can discuss a whole lot of different subject matters and bring up all sorts of things. Yeah, and it's just, yeah, I've got really good recall, which helps, and it sort of then allows me to get more of that information out. Having a day job is also a hassle in producing enough content. So I will be producing a bit of content the coming weeks. I'm trying to get my schedule all sorted out so I can try and actually get back into producing a bit more content. But at the same time, also, these live streams help in terms of producing content for the Clip channel. So if people haven't actually subscribed to the Clip channel, go down to the featured channels and the Clip channel, the Harry Serpanos Clip channel. Do subscribe to that, because there's a lot of little clips that are clipped out, because they're easy to do, to generate little clips out of existing videos. And it covers a lot of these things that I cover from these questions that you guys ask in the live streams. The majority of clips are generated from that, so what you do is you're supporting the other channel and building up all these little nuggets of, my sort of insights into things, for you guys to be able to then use those to share them around to friends and family more effectively, because they just little bite-sized content. And if then they want to go a bit deeper into stuff, they come to this channel and can look at the content and all that, because I try to provide whatever I say, I back it up with research. I just don't just blurt out things. It is backed up, and so my content tends to be very different compared to other people, because the people just the standard stuff they just regurgitate over and over again. It's just the way it is. You're welcome, mate. Anyway, I am out of here. See yous in less than 12 and a half hours. Take care. Good night. And good day to those in Western Europe. Take care. Or in Africa. Look after yourselves, and see yous.